Chapter 481. Hi, how are you? In front of a port in New York City, when Jiang Hai's yacht stopped at the side, Selena Gomez had already walked up with her small suitcase. Looking at everyone who was looking at her from the plate armor, she couldn't help but smile and wave her hand, then naturally stuffed the suitcase into Jiang Hai's hands. Seeing this scene, Daliana and Marian couldn't help but roll their eyes at Jiang Hai. They knew that this guy was up to no good. "Oh, come in and take a rest first, we will leave after replenishing the fuel and fresh water." As if sensing the gaze of his two daughters, Jiang Hai smiled and said to Selena Gomez, "Okay, don't you, come in and take a rest?" Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Selena Gomez couldn't help but raise her eyebrows, and at the same time, she whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. Jiang Hai couldn't help but be excited. But he still held back. He can do whatever he wants at sea, but for now, he has to focus on business. He. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Selena Gomez smiled, took back her luggage, and went to her room under the lead of Daliana. Jiang Hai, Belle, and Harriman Fels were preparing fresh water and food. Jiang Hai was an impulsive person. If he wanted to do something, he would rely more on his hot-bloodedness. This was the legendary 3 minutes of hot-bloodedness. Once that hot-bloodedness was exhausted, he would often lose interest in this kind of thing. For example, he likes guns. When he first got a gun, he used it every day, but after a month, he lost interest. For example, he likes to ride horses. He hasn't been riding for long. Little Xia is now more of a decoration. Of course, Jiang Hai still goes to see it every day and takes it out to play. This is also what Jiang Hai does in the manor. Therefore, Jiang Hai decided to go to sea this time as well. He only prepared for 2 days before going to sea. There are a lot of things that need to be prepared for going to sea, such as GPS, radio, and walkie-talkies. Plus, this time, Jiang Hai is going fishing. On the surface, he is going fishing, so sonar and so on are indispensable. Among these people, only Jiang Hai knows how to sail, so these things need to be prepared by Jiang Hai. Fortunately, although Edward Anderson is not going, he helped Jiang Hai prepare everything. In addition to these hardware things, there are many other things that need to be prepared. The first and most important thing is fresh water. Although there was plenty of water on the sea, the water was salty and undrinkable. Therefore, the water was definitely not good. In addition to drinking, the fresh water also needs to be prepared for bathing. After all, after bathing with seawater, there will be a salty smell. When it dries, there will be salt particles, which is very unpleasant. So the bathing water needs to be prepared in advance. Of course, Jiang Hai's yacht is not an old ship. It has a seawater purification machine that can turn seawater into drinking water. If you don't dare to drink it, you can at least turn the seawater into bath water. But even so, Jiang Hai prepared a lot of water in the cabin. After all, this is his first time going to sea. Although it's not his first time going to the Caribbean, after all, he has been to Miami before. But this is his first time sailing, so it is always good to be careful. In addition to fresh water, the second most important thing is oil, diesel, because it is related to the voyage of the entire ship. In addition to filling up the tank, Jiang Hai also prepared 3 barrels of diesel. He is not afraid of causing trouble in case of a fire. In any case, Jiang Hai also prepared a lot of diesel. But in addition to these things, there are many other things that need to be prepared, such as weapons. Carrying weapons everywhere, no matter in which country, is a felony and extremely dangerous. But this is the sea, so it's hard to say. Because if there is a conflict, then what Jiang Hai and the others have to do is to survive until the Coast Guard arrives. At this time, if they don't have a weapon to defend themselves, then it's not a very good thing. So this time, Jiang Hai and the others brought a lot of weapons, including Jiang Hai's Big Desert Eagle and August. Apart from that, he also borrowed the M134 from the Winthrop police station. With this weapon, it would be best if no one came to provoke them. Otherwise, even a small boat would be blown up. In addition to him, Belle Lester and Azalina Vicaborio also prepared some weapons in case of emergencies. In addition to these weapons, Jiang Hai has a lot of food, all kinds of food. Beer, vodka, drinks, snacks, chips, fruits, beef, chicken, bread, flour, and so on. He had almost moved the entire kitchen of his house over. But compared to his kitchen, there are all kinds of vegetables, such as sweet potatoes, cucumbers, and so on. Among the fruits, Jiang Hai brought the most were apples and lemons, which he did not like to eat. He did not like apples because they were troublesome. Lemons because they were too sour, but these two things are indispensable when going out to sea. When going out to sea, it is inevitable that there will be storms and waves. When it is too swaying to eat, the main food to eat is apples, which can replenish water and have enough nutrition. It is also the easiest thing to swallow. Lemons are indispensable because without lemons, it is easy to get septicemia. Jiang Hai does not know the specific reason, but Edward Anderson is very familiar with these things. He is responsible for most of these things. At the same time, he told Jiang Hai to replenish fuel, fresh water, and other necessities at every place. Of course, the most important thing is various kinds of medicine, antibiotics, and vitamins. These things are absolutely indispensable. This is Jiang Hai's first time going out to sea. Although it is just a lap along the coast of the United States, to be honest, everyone is not very relieved. If it is not because the place Jiang Hai is going to is too far away, they will not let Jiang Hai go there. There is no harm in being careful. Jiang Hai has always known that the sea is not a very safe place. So he has been following what Edward Anderson told him. Even if it is just driving from Winthrop to New York to pick up Selena Gomez, Jiang Hai has replenished the fresh water and diesel consumed during this period of time. At the same time, he bought some fresh fruits at the harbor here. After everything is settled, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the yacht and headed for their next destination. According to the route that Edward Anderson originally planned for them, after picking up people in New York, their second stop should have been Atlantic City. However, because Pa Walton lives in Atlantic City, Jiang Hai and Selena Gomez are afraid of her, they decided not to go to Atlantic City, but to Atlantic City in Delaware. Speaking of Delaware, it is a bit interesting. It is also known as the Delaware State. In the United States, this state is quite famous, but it is not famous. It is famous because it is a state that everyone in the United States who went to school in the United States knows about. Because it is the first state to join the United States, it is also known as the first state. Its political status is even more impressive than Washington. However, it is the least famous state because it has no special products and no economic achievements. The most famous scenic spot in the whole state is called the Marshall Steam Museum. It is a place to collect steam cars. Other than that, there are some famous people's manors and the like. It can be said that this place wasn't famous. The state's primary industry was the forest industry, the secondary industry was the light industry, and the tertiary industry was the service industry. The most famous industry in this place was the DuPont Foundation, which was located here. However, Jiang Hai does not have any contact with DuPont, so he came here purely to spend the night, nothing more. After the boat set off in New York, Jiang Hai set the coordinates. When he set the coordinates, Selena Gomez has already arrived at his cabin. After the two met, there is naturally no need to say much. Jiang Hai knows why she came here, and she also knows why he came here. After everything was settled, the two hugged each other and began to fight in the captain's cabin. Jiang Hai's physical fitness naturally does not need to be mentioned, and Selena Gomez is also experiencing a long drought. After the two fought for 2 hours, Selena Gomez was like a puddle of mud, lying on Jiang Hai's body, constantly gasping for breath. Jiang Hai also carried her to his boss chair. Although he has completed it twice, he still insists on staying in Selena Gomez's body, gently moving from time to time. "You are still so powerful." I thought, after so long. "I can beat you." "It seems that my combat power is still not enough." Selena Gomez leaned against Jiang Hai's ear and gently bit his ear. Then, she blew into his ear and said weakly, "Don't worry, Jiang Hai, I'll be fine." "You want to beat me? You are still far from it." Listening to Selena Gomez's words, Jiang Hai smiled and patted her butt. "It seems that your wife will have a hard time in the future. Either she accepts having you with another woman, or she will die in your hands sooner or later. It's really lovable." Gently biting Jiang Hai's shoulder, Selena Gomez said slowly. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai can't help but feel a little embarrassed. He always can't handle such a topic. "Hurry up and do it again. I haven't had lunch yet." Seeing that Jiang Hai is silent, Selena leaned over and whispered. Chapter 482. I find that I like you a little, what should I do? With her head buried in Jiang Hai's neck, Selena Gomez whispered on Jiang Hai's body. Listening to her words, Jiang Hai's hands that were stroking her back couldn't help but stagnate. "What's wrong? Are you scared?" Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Selena Gomez raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai and said. "Of course not, I just don't know if you are serious. If you are, then you have to consider quitting the entertainment industry." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile, then his hands moved again. "That's more like it, don't worry, I like you a little, but I just like you, okay?" Hearing Jiang Hai's answer that satisfied her, Selena Gomez said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. "Am I a duckling? You still need to explain it in a sentence?" This is the 7th day after Jiang Hai set off from Winthrop, and it is also the last day of their trip. From Winthrop, to be honest, the journey was very calm, except for sometimes the wind and waves were a little big, nothing happened. During the day, Jiang Hai and the others played in the sea, and at night, they stopped at a nearby town to rest. Along the way, they also saw the local customs on the east coast of the Sea Kingdom. On the first day, they went to Atlantic City in Delaware. On the second day, they went to the most famous Virginia Beach in Virginia, and on the third day, they went to Cedar Island in North Carolina. On the fourth day, they went to Charleston in South Carolina, and on the fifth day, they went to Georgia's Savannah in Georgia. On the sixth day, they arrived in Florida, and not long after, they went to Jacksonville, the largest city in the state. On the seventh day, that is, tonight, they arrived in Miami, but instead of going to the city to rest, they rested directly on the ship. These days, the relationship between Jiang Hai and Selena Gomez is rapidly warming up. Because the two of them had already passed first base, second base, and third base, directly hitting home runs. At first, it was fun to play on the surface of the sea. But later, there was nothing fun to do on the surface of the sea. Therefore, they began to fight day and night. In the captain's cabin, in their rooms, in the bathroom, on the floor, and even at night in the kitchen, on the armor, on the platform, and on the small boat, there were traces of their battle. So much so that several times, Jiang Hai felt that Delina and Marion were looking at them strangely. And almost every time Bale docked, he would disembark and go to the nearby town to play. The next day, he would come back with some cosmetics. Jiang Hai naturally knew why, but Selena Gomez and Jiang Hai liked it a little. The only ones who did not move were Azalina and Harriman Ferns. Harriman really did not understand these things. As for Azalina, Jiang Hai did not know if she had solved it herself, but she did not seem to be acting strangely. Because of these days and nights of fighting and chatting, the two of them became more and more familiar with each other. Not only did they know more about each other's bodies, but they also knew everything about each other. For example, Selina knew that Jiang Hai had been married before, and she also knew about Jiang Hai's current situation. She also knew about Jiang Hai's family situation. Of course, no matter who it was, Jiang Hai would not tell anyone about the Dragon Balls. Jiang Hai also learned about her situation. This girl, born in 1992, became famous very early. At the age of 15, she became famous in the United States because of a Disney movie. Then, she starred in 3 original Disney movies. But what she really liked was music. In 2009, she switched to the music battlefield, and the results were very good. She also told Jiang Hai about her love life. Her first boyfriend was called Tyler Lautner, the one who played the werewolf in Twilight. But that was actually just a publicity stunt. The two of them only got along for a few days, and after a few meetings, they broke up. Later, her real first love, Justin, was a scumbag. Because this guy not only had a debauched private life, but he was also very insensible. Selena Gomez could not stand it. The two of them broke up and got back together. It was not until the year before last that they completely broke up. But after they broke up, Justin still talked about the things between them everywhere. At that time, Selena Gomez almost went crazy. Then, she met Jiang Hai. According to her, Jiang Hai had completely let her come out of the world of men. Because now the person imprinted in her heart was called Jiang Hai. But, are you really not going to stay by my side? His hand slowly moved from Selena Gomez's back to her head. Jiang Hai asked her with a little hesitation in his words. Maybe, but now my career is on the rise. Rise, do you understand? Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Selena Gomez also buried her head deeper and deeper, and said seriously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also cupped her pretty face and kissed her affectionately. The two kissed for about 3 minutes. Selena Gomez struggled to get up, gasping for breath. Are you trying to suffocate me? Looking at the coquettish Selena Gomez, Jiang Hai also smiled. Still smiling, it seems that you have recovered. Then, let's continue. Looking at Jiang Hai's smile, Selena Gomez glanced at Jiang Hai. Her hand slowly slid down, and then her head followed. Feeling Selena Gomez's movements, Jiang Hai also sat up. For times the combat power of a human body is not comparable to her. Aren't you afraid that you can't go to the field tomorrow? Patting her butt, Jiang Hai said to her with a smile. Compared to your mouth, I prefer to kiss you here. Do you know why? Selena Gomez looked up at Jiang Hai and said to Jiang Hai. Not very clear. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was puzzled. He really didn't understand what she meant. Because it doesn't talk nonsense. Looking at her disdainful smile, Jiang Hai knew that he was going to take this battle seriously. Whoosh. The sound of planes taking off and landing could be heard outside the Miami airport. The people standing here at this time were none other than Jiang Hai and the others. After 7 days of fun, Selena Gomez was going back to New York today, and Jiang Hai was going to do what he had to do. Goodbye, I will go to Winthrop when I have time. Selena Gomez hugged Jiang Hai for the last time outside the airport and said with a serious face. In the past 7 days, the two people who were not very familiar with each other became the most familiar people in the world. At least for Selena Gomez, Jiang Hai was definitely the person who knew her best. But now they were going to separate like this. To be honest, she was a little reluctant, but she thought it through. She also learned something from Jiang Hai's words. Jiang Hai was more or less a Wuxia person. She was a star. First, she couldn't take care of her husband and children at home, at least not now. Second, after all, she had a relationship with Justin before. Compared with the second point, the first point was more important. So she knew very well that she and Jiang Hai had no chance. She knew that this was not good. She should break up with Jiang Hai directly, but sometimes, feelings couldn't be broken just because you said so. You must come to me, I remember what you said. Looking at Selena Gomez beside him, Jiang Hai also smiled. The two looked at each other again, but they didn't do anything too intimate. After all, this was the airport, and she was a public figure, so they just hugged, looked at each other, and then smiled. Jiang Hai watched Selena Gomez go through the security check. Until he couldn't see her, Jiang Hai turned around and returned to the parking lot. At this time, in the parking lot, in a car, Delina, Marion, Azalina, and Belle Lester were all waiting for Jiang Hai. At this time, Harriman Fells was still looking after the ship. This big guy always carried out Jiang Hai's orders without a single mistake. Seeing Jiang Hai come back alone, the people in the car were obviously relieved. It seems that I don't have to go out every night. Seeing Jiang Hai come back, Belle Lester chuckled. You don't have to go. Hearing his words, Delina and Marion couldn't help but blush. As for Azalina, she was much more shameless. She raised her head and smiled at him. Hearing Azalina's words, Belle Lester was stunned for a moment. He suddenly had a feeling. Did Azalina fall for him? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at himself in the rearview mirror. He really did look handsome. You can go and have sex with Harriman. However, it was obvious that he was overthinking because Azalina's next words made him feel depressed. He knew that this rose with thorns would not be so easy to pluck. Moreover, he vaguely felt that this woman was very curious about his boss, and there was also an indescribable feeling. Okay, let's go back. At this time, Jiang Hai also walked to the front of the car. This car was rented by them. It was a 7-seater business car. Jiang Hai opened the door of the front passenger seat and sat in the front passenger seat. He then said to Belle Lester, "Let's go." "Boss, now that we sent Selena Gomez away, where are we going?" While starting the engine and driving the car out of the airport, Belle Lester asked Jiang Hai. He was indeed a little curious. "We're going to fish for tuna." But after hearing his words, Jiang Hai replied with certainty. But after hearing Jiang Hai's words, he was a little confused. Fish for tuna? Bullsh *T. Although they came out this time to fish for tuna, it didn't look like they were fishing for tuna. Chapter 483. Boss, we're almost at Isabella. Listening to Belle Lester's voice, Jiang Hai also woke up from his sleep. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the distant land. He couldn't help but stretch his body. We're finally here. Jiang Hai said with a smile as he held the platform in front of him. It was the 9th day since Jiang Hai set off from Winthrop. In the first 7 days, he had been playing along the coast of the United States. On the 7th day, he arrived in Miami. In order to send Selena Gomez back on the 8th day, Jiang Hai specially rested in Miami for a day. After everything was settled, Jiang Hai rushed to the south on the 9th day. Their destination this time was Isabella. Of course, it was just the name of a city in this country. This country was called Puerto Rico. Speaking of which, there was a reason why they chose this country. South America was not much more peaceful than Africa. It was particularly chaotic, especially near the Caribbean Sea. After all, this place had been Europe's backyard from the very beginning. Wars had never stopped fighting for territory. The relationship with the United States was also messy. Some were hostile, some were ambiguous, and some even wanted to become a state of the United States. There were 20 countries on the Caribbean Sea. They were Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Antigua and Barbuda, the Dominican Federation, Trinidad and Tobago, and so on. Although there were many countries, Jiang Hai didn't have many places to choose. These countries were either in chaos or in the territory of other countries. A gentleman wouldn't stand under a collapsing wall. Although Jiang Hai was not a gentleman, he was at least afraid of death. If he was targeted, who would be responsible? In addition to these countries, there were also some that were not friendly to the United States, such as Cuba. This is a spy planted by our Great Red Alliance beside the United States. If Japan is the United States outpost, then Cuba is our outpost. Although Jiang Hai is now a member of the Imperial Court, this ship is still an American ship. Moreover, the people on the ship were all Americans. If they went and offended others, they would be in big trouble. Therefore, he couldn't go to countries like Cuba. After some calculations, the only country he could go to was Puerto Rico. Speaking of which, this country was quite pitiful. You could say that this country was a proper country, but they didn't even admit that they were a proper country. You could say that they weren't a proper country, but they were still a proper country. Puerto Rico was originally the home of the Taino tribe. Later, it was discovered by Columbus in 1493 and named San Juan Island. In 1508, the Spanish established a colony here and made it a Spanish territory. At the end of the 19th century, the Spanish-American War broke out. At that time, Spain was already finished, so it was defeated by the United States. This place became the territory of the United States, and at first, the United States also wanted to colonize this place. But the people here had been harmed by the Spanish, so they were unwilling and resisted. In 1950, they even tried to assassinate the President of the United States. When the Americans saw this, they felt that this country was unstable, burdensome, and did not have any strategic resources like oil. Why would they want this country? So, in 1952, the United States told Puerto Rico that they were free, and they should go and govern themselves. The United States doesn't want them because of defense and the United Nations vote. So, the United States still has the final say in defense, foreign affairs, and tariffs. As for the rest, do as you see fit. Do whatever you want, and the Puerto Ricans were left in a daze. They didn't expect freedom to come so easily. At first, they were happy, but later, they became more and more confused. Freedom was here, but there was nothing on their island. Other than some cocoa beans that could be sold, there was nothing else. There was no heavy industry, no light industry, and not even a processing industry for agricultural products. The Puerto Ricans were dumbfounded again. Without the support of their godfather in the United States and the dumping of large amounts of food, they really had a problem even eating. This was different from the relationship between big countries. For example, in the Wuxia, the things from the United States came in to attack the Chinese market. These things could have been made in the Chinese market, so there were tariffs and restrictions. But Puerto Rico had nothing. He was a beggar. Then, a rich man said, "Work for me, and I'll give you money to spend." In the end, after working for 2 days, the beggar felt that the rich man was exploiting him. He felt unhappy and wanted freedom, so he started to resist. At first, the rich man said, "Don't leave, you'll starve to death if you leave." But he refused and insisted on leaving. If he didn't leave, he would kill the rich man. So, the rich man said, "Just leave." When he came out, he realized that he was still a beggar. He didn't know anything and couldn't work anywhere else. So he could only shamelessly ask to come back, but the United States government didn't want him to come back. They didn't want him anymore. During the 2012 elections, Puerto Rico had its fourth vote on whether to change its relationship with the United States. There were a total of 3 options. Become a state of the United States, expand its autonomy, and become completely independent. 8 million people in the country had the right to vote. In the end, 1. 3 million people voted, and 61% of the people supported becoming the 51st state of the United States. 33% of the people wanted to expand their autonomy, and only 5% were in favor of complete independence. But after the vote, the Americans still said, "I don't want you. You can vote however you want." This made Puerto Rico very embarrassed. So now, although it was an independent country in name, the people in this country were all saying, "We're Americans, we're the 51st state of the United States." What was kneeling and licking? This was kneeling and licking. Jiang Hai didn't think much of it. The Americans would naturally receive the best treatment here. So Jiang Hai decided to come here. While fishing for tuna, he could also look for treasure. Of course, the treasure was the most important. To Jiang Hai, tuna was just a toy, and the treasure was the foundation of his life. The place he chose, Isabella, was a city that couldn't even be found on Baidu. Firstly, it was because the city was too small. Secondly, it was because there wasn't much to say about the city. Everyone wasn't very familiar with it. This city was the same for Jiang Hai. Whatever this city had, the Caribbean had. Coral reefs, all kinds of fish, sunshine, beaches, and beautiful women were the least valuable things in the Caribbean. Therefore, there really wasn't much to say about it. When Jiang Hai's boat approached Isabella's harbor, the largest boat in the harbor was Jiang Hai's yacht. Jiang Hai also looked out from the captain's cabin. He only saw a row of low bungalows forming a small town in front of him. Of course, this was not the city center of Isabella. At most, this was a small town by the docks, but it was still evident. When the boat arrived at the dock, even the person in charge of the dock was alarmed. He immediately ran out of his cabin. "Hello, are you tourists from the United States?" Looking at Jiang Hai and the others who tied the boat to the pier's stone pillars, the person in charge carefully walked over and asked Jiang Hai and the others while stammering. "Oh, yes, we're here to fish for tuna." Although Jiang Hai wanted to laugh at the person in charge's careful look, he didn't because he was really afraid that if he laughed, he would scare this guy. "Oh, welcome, welcome. Your arrival really brightens our town. I'm the security guard of this dock. Are you going to Isabella or just stay in our town?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the guard captain continued to speak with his unfamiliar accent and said excitedly to Jiang Hai, "Oh, we'll live on the boat, but we should buy some things or find some food here." Seeing his enthusiasm, Jiang Hai was a little confused. These guys can't be thinking of selling the boat to him after his people get off, right? It's better to be careful in this unfamiliar place. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the guard captain smiled and nodded. "Be careful, I always feel that these people are too intimate." After meeting with the guard captain, Jiang Hai deliberately pulled the people around him and said something to them. To be honest, Jiang Hai was a little confused, hearing Jiang Hai's words, although they may not think so. After all, Jiang Hai was the boss, so whatever he said was the truth. At this time, the boat had been sailing for a day, and the sky was gradually getting dark. Jiang Hai asked Delina, Marian, Azalina, and Harriman Fells to stay on the boat and be careful of these intimate locals. He went to the town with Belle Lester. Jiang Hai brought a lot of food this time, especially beef, a lot. However, they still had to replenish their water, and sooner or later they would have to deal with the residents here, so they came to check it out first. If the residents here were kind, then it would be good to get some local food, wine, and so on. Obviously, Jiang Hai was overthinking things. When Jiang Hai and Belle Lester walked into the town, almost everyone who saw them nodded kindly. It was understandable. After all, among the 1.3 million people, only 5% of them were like the nationalistic youths in China. They wanted to kill all Americans. The remaining 95% had a good impression of Americans. There were even a lot of young girls who secretly gave Jiang Hai flirtatious glances when they saw him. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that he was a little too nervous. Belle was even happier. Compared to Jiang Hai, he was much more free than Jiang Hai. If these girls were secretly making eyes at him, then he wouldn't hesitate to ride them. Chapter 484. Excuse me, where are the restaurants in this town? Seeing that the residents of the town didn't seem to be hostile to him, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, then asked a man who walked past him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man was obviously stunned for a moment, then a string of words came out of his mouth that Jiang Hai didn't understand. What do you mean? Listening to the man's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. What's going on? Boss, he's speaking Spanish. Looking at Jiang Hai's confused look, Belle next to him couldn't help but laugh. Since Columbus discovered the American continent, for a long time, almost 300 to 400 years, South America was actually the territory of Portugal and Spain. The original indigenous people here had actually been killed by them. The rest were the slaves they had brought over. Most of these people came from Africa. Therefore, there were many countries where the race was almost similar to the black people in Africa. It could be said that they were of the same origin. Cuba, Jamaica, and other countries were all like this. Puerto Rico was also the territory of Spain, and almost all the indigenous people were killed. But later, because of the Spanish-American War, the United States did not have many restrictions and requirements for the colony. Those who had read the history of various countries knew that the Americans only cared about money, and were not too interested in power and status. They belonged to the kind of people who made a lot of money quietly. So before World War I, the Americans had almost no status in the world. At that time, the world's leader was Britain, the leader of the army was France, and the rising place was Germany. The Netherlands was the previous leader, and Spain was the previous leader. The United States had never been the leader, after all, it had just become independent not long ago. But after taking over Puerto Rico, they had to send people over, so they sent a large number of white people. The current generation of Puerto Ricans was indeed very good-looking. They had the physique of black people and the appearance of white people. The Native Americans belonged to the Asian race, so they had the black hair of the Orientals and exquisite facial features. They also had very small pores, unlike the thick pores of white people and the strangely developed bones of black people. It was precisely because of this that Puerto Rico was famous for producing beautiful women. The world's strongest beauty pageant country was Venezuela, but plastic surgery was popular there. The Puerto Ricans could not even afford to eat, so they could not afford plastic surgery. However, they were famous for their good looks, especially the women, who were very popular. They had slender figures, exquisite facial features, and ample bosoms. He had to admit that they were all stunners. One of the more typical beauties was Rosalén Sanchez. She was the foreign agent who had deceived Sheng Long when he was acting in Rush Hour 2. She was indeed not bad looking. In the movie, she was even better than the international chapter. The topic was a little off topic. Although Puerto Rico was now bent on joining the United States and becoming the 51st state of the United States, the official language here was still the same as during the Spanish era. The people here mainly spoke Spanish. As for English, there weren't many people who knew it, so Jiang Hai and this person talked for a long time. It was really like a chicken talking to a duck. They fought to a draw. Jiang Hai couldn't understand what he said, and he couldn't understand what Jiang Hai said. In the end, they could only leave it unsettled. After letting this person go, Jiang Hai could only look for someone he knew. The only person who could speak English was the guard captain. When the guard captain saw Jiang Hai looking for him, he was naturally very happy. So he introduced the town to Jiang Hai. Don't look at the small town with only 1,000 people living here. Although Massachusetts is small, it has all the essentials. Not only are there shops, restaurants, hotels, and even bars. This was because sometimes Americans would come here, but they would come by plane. It was the first time they saw someone like Jiang Hai who came by boat. After coming here, Americans would choose to go diving or something like that for fun. The Caribbean Sea was known as the cleanest water in the world. The sea here was really clear, especially in the coral reef area. It was really a sacred place for diving, so many people came here every year to dive. In order to cope with the consumption of these people, the town naturally prepared a lot of things. After Jiang Hai asked, he determined where he wanted to go. He planned to go to the restaurant to eat something first, then consider going to the bar. Of course, the one who mainly wanted to go to the bar was Belle, and Jiang Hai was just there to accompany him. He wasn't interested in these places. After asking for directions, Jiang Hai also gave the guard captain $100. This was a tip, and also a protection fee. With a local bully like him watching over here, Jiang Hai would be more relieved. After receiving Jiang Hai's money, the guard captain was even more enthusiastic, and even personally took Jiang Hai to the town's restaurant. After entering the restaurant, Jiang Hai found that there were really a lot of people in the restaurant. Looking at the food on the table, he found that it was basically fish. After all, they didn't have much land, and they mainly cultivated cocoa. So meat and so on were all imported from the United States, but the imported things were certainly not cheap. Even if the United States didn't have to pay customs duties here, the transportation cost was certainly, so the beef here was very expensive. Basically, not many people could afford to eat it. Their main food was fish. Sometimes, they would only have chicken for a change. After Jiang Hai and Belle entered the restaurant, they really attracted almost everyone's attention. They didn't care and just sat at an empty table in the restaurant. Not long after, a Puerto Rican girl came over and asked Jiang Hai in slightly unfamiliar English, "What would you like to eat? Is there no menu?" Understanding her words, Jiang Hai was a little surprised because he didn't know what to eat. There are only 4 ways to cook here: boiled, roasted, stewed, and fried. You have to choose what you want to eat first, and then tell us what you want to eat. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, it was obvious that this wasn't the first time the girl met such a customer, so she just shrugged and said to them helplessly, What raw materials do you have here?" Hearing what the girl said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be speechless, then asked, "Only chicken and fish." After listening to Jiang Hai's words, the girl pointed directly to the wall. She knew that Jiang Hai would definitely ask what kind of fish she wanted, so it was better to let him see it himself. Sure enough, following the girl's pointed finger, Jiang Hai also looked at the wall. At this time, he found that there was a painting on the wall at this time. There were many fish drawn on the painting, divided into 3 columns and 4 parts. In fact, this painting was posted in all restaurants, hotels, and brothels throughout the Caribbean. This is a unified fish sales list in the Caribbean. Of course, it refers not to the price, but to the type. It is divided into 4 parts. 1 part is recommended to eat fish, 1 part is edible fish, 1 part is not recommended to eat fish, and 1 part is not edible fish. In a restaurant like this, only the first 2 columns of fish are available. Jiang Hai looked at it. The fish on the painting, in addition to a cartoon image, was accompanied by an English word. It seems that this was prepared for people like them. To be honest, Jiang Hai has been in the fishery for almost a year. Basically, he can recognize most of the fish in his fishery, but there are many fish on the painting that he doesn't know. He doesn't know, so Belle is even more ridiculous. The first recommended fish is lionfish, lionfish. This fish is also called cobras. It was originally a fish that didn't exist in the Caribbean. The reason why it appeared here is because there was a typhoon that blew up an aquarium in Miami. The ancestors of these fish came here in the typhoon. After settling down here, the lionfish's fighting prowess wasn't bad, and the spikes on its body were poisonous. Therefore, other than sharks, this kind of fish was not afraid of any other fish. However, sharks were limited, so this kind of fish was like the hare in Australia. It was now a scourge here. All the shops recommended eating this kind of fish. Diving tourists could also catch this kind of fish to feed the sharks. It seemed that these people were quite helpless. Below lionfish, the second type of fish is called siro in English. According to this name, you can't find it on Google. This fish is called mackerel, also known as big mackerel. The fish below this fish is called kingfish. According to the translation, it is the kingfish, but in fact, it is not. This fish is called king mackerel, also a type of mackerel, but it is very big. The fish outside was called Spanish mackerel. It looked like a very high-end fish, but in fact, it was also available in the country, and it was very cheap. Spanish mackerel. People who live near Lian City knew this fish. Spanish mackerel dumplings were quite famous. But here, this fish is much bigger than the fish in China. Compared with the fish here, the domestic mackerel is just a fry. The fish behind is called wahoo. The fish behind is called trevallies. This fish is translated as devil fish, but it is actually called trevallies here. It is also a fish. The most famous one is trevallies. It is very big, but it tastes average. After trevallies, there is a fish that Jiang Hai doesn't know. It is called mahi-mahi. This fish is also very strange. It is the first time that Jiang Hai has seen it. The two fish below this fish are yellowtail snapper. This fish is called yellow snapper. Jiang Hai knows about yellow snapper. There are some in his manor, but he has never seen yellow snapper. The name behind this type of fish is tuna, which means tuna. In Hong Kong, this type of fish is called tuna fish. But in China, when it is translated into Mandarin, it is called tuna fish. Finally, the recommended food is squid. This is all the recommended food fish. Chapter 485. After the recommended edible fish, there are edible fish. The first one is lobster, which is lobster. Originally, there were quite a lot of lobsters in the Caribbean. Of course, there are still a lot of lobsters now. However, after eating lobsters for so many years, there are very few lobsters near the coast. If you want to catch lobsters, you have to go farther. The second edible is conch, which means conch. Below the conch is barracuda, which Jiang Hai knows. It's barracuda, which is a barracuda. This fish swims very fast and is also known as sea wolf. It tastes very good, but there aren't many in his fish farm. Below is dogsnappr, which is a snapper, similar to the yellow snapper above. Below is muttsnappr, which is also a snapper, but it is a two-color snapper, which is rarer. There are also three edible fish, which are dppsnappr, redhndgrupr, and rockhdgrupr, which are all the edible fish. The best ones not to eat are all kinds of groupers except for the above two. There is also a snapper called coral, which Jiang Hai has never seen before. There is also parrotfish, rippled lip fish. No one may know this name, but generally, people who have read fishery novels will not be unfamiliar with this name, humphead wrasse, which is the official name of humphead wrasse. In addition to triggerfish, parrotfish, also known as parrotfish, is also a protected species here. These four fish are the best ones not to eat, and the things that must not be eaten are sharks and turtles. In the Caribbean, this paper is posted in every shop. Of course, if you catch these things in the sea and no one cares about you, and you take it to the restaurant to cook, they may call the police. Speaking of these fish, Jiang Hai has seen some and some have not, but anyway, he has some impressions of most of the fish in his mind. But what the hell is this mahi-mahi? He really wants to try it. Give me one of these. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he pointed to the fish. Huh? Are you sure? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the waiter looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. Sure. Hearing the waiter's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. This person is still afraid that I can't pay. If I were you, I wouldn't order something so exaggerated. Just as Jiang Hai finished his confirmation, a female voice came from the table next to him. Jiang Hai and Belle Lester looked over, and Belle's eyes lit up. There were a total of 4 people at the table who spoke. They were all girls, and they didn't look very old. They were wearing very light but conservative clothes. They had bronze skin, big eyes, slender legs, full, big eyes, and exquisite facial features. Although they looked slightly different, their Latin style was very strong. The one who spoke was the prettiest girl among Jiang Hai and the others at that table. Hey beauty, why? Hearing her words, Belle Lester asked her with a smile, at the same time, his eyes drifted there. No reason, the fish you ordered is called loach. As far as I know, there are only 3 of these fish in their store. Every day, they are mature, that is to say, they are more than 1 meter and weigh 30 kilograms. Are you sure you can eat it? Hearing Bale's words, the girl turned her head and looked at Bale and Jiang Hai with a playful look on her face. Hearing her words, Belle and Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. This was indeed something they didn't consider. Then give me half. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to the waiter who was still waiting next to him. Half a fish is about 15 kilograms. Don't forget, although only Jiang Hai and Belle came down to eat, there are still 4 people on the boat. However, there were still 4 people on the ship. They still had to pack some for them to eat. They couldn't possibly eat it all by themselves. Since Jiang Hai and the others already know how big the fish is and they want half, the waiter didn't say anything and directly left. When he came back again, he gave Jiang Hai and the others 2 glasses of orange juice. There should be quite a lot of orange juice here. Hey beauty, hello, my name is Belle Lester, can we get to know each other? While waiting for the food to be served, Jiang Hai took out his mobile phone and searched for information about loach. Belle turned his head and looked at the beauties over there and asked. I know you, American. You came down from the big ship in the port. I have always heard that Americans have always been very indulgent in their private lives. Now it seems that this is true. Hearing his words, the girl who just spoke couldn't help but glance at him, then she put a piece of fish into her mouth with a fork and said slowly. Hey, this is your misunderstanding of us. In fact, we are very loyal. Hearing the girl's words, Belle pretended to be hurt and then slowly said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This guy still has the nerve to say that he is loyal? In Jiang Hai's view, the most loyal person in the entire manor is Philip. Except for him, the other men are all bad, including Tommy Char, Eleanor Cece, and Andrew Christian. These guys have gone out to play after their wives went to work in town. Jiang Hai didn't go with them because he didn't like the fast food they went to find. The most aggressive one should be Belle Lester. According to Robbins Garcia, this guy is quite popular in bars, nightclubs, and some brothels. He said that he is a special forces soldier from the Triangular State, and that he once fought against terrorists and showed off his muscles. Then, the young doctors and nurses all looked at him in a new light. Some of them even went out to have fun. After they were done, the woman did not even take his money. This made Robbins Garcia and the others envious. This time, he definitely didn't have any thoughts about the women on the ship. He didn't dare to have any thoughts about Jiang Hai. But when he reached the shore and got off the land, he went out to play many times. Hey, I have already introduced myself. I can't keep calling you Beauty 1, Beauty 2, Beauty 3, and Beauty 4. Out of courtesy, you should also introduce yourselves. After saying a few more words, Belle said to the four beauties in front of him with a smile, while raising his eyebrows. It has to be said that Belle is indeed a master of flirting. When he said this, the four girls opposite him all laughed. "Hey, don't you care about your little brother?" But the girl who just spoke knocked on the table and said to Jiang Hai, who was playing with his mobile phone in the distance. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little surprised, because he seems to be more like Belle's follower. "How do you know that he is my little brother?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at his and Belle's clothes. The clothes of the two are actually similar. None of the workers in Jiang Hai's manor is short of money. Jiang Hai gives more wages and bonuses. Because of this, the clothes that they usually buy were also very good. Because they worked in the manor, Jiang Hai and the others had to wear outdoor clothes. Because of this, Jiang Hai's and Belle's clothes weren't much different. Jiang Hai also didn't wear his gold watch. How did this girl know that he and Belle had a relationship? It mainly depends on the temperament. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl couldn't help but smile and said, while Belle shrugged helplessly. "Then I have to thank you." Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai can't help but feel a little dumbfounded. "What is this called?" "You're welcome, sir." "Hello, my name is Kevin Carter. This is my English name, Spanish. I guess you are not interested in hearing it. I heard that you are here to fish for tuna. I think you may need a guide. What do you think of me?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl stood up directly and walked to Jiang Hai and Belle's table, then sat directly next to Jiang Hai and said to Jiang Hai. "You? To be honest, if this girl came and said, 'I heard that you need a prostitute, what do you think of me?' Jiang Hai would say, 'Not bad. Bronze skin, a fit body, a good face, and a pair of long gun stands.' Jiang Hai likes her very much, but the problem is, she is talking about a guide. Her? What kind of guide? And most importantly, her name, Kevin Carter? What the hell? Isn't this a man's name? I heard that there are a lot of people in Brazil. Could it be that there are also people in Puerto Rico? Don't underestimate me. I am a native here. I have lived here for 18 years. When I was 13 years old, I followed my father to make a living on the sea. I don't think I am worse than those fishermen. Our school is on holiday now, so we need to find a job to earn some money." Looking at Jiang Hai, the girl didn't understand the meaning behind Jiang Hai's eyes. She just thought that Jiang Hai didn't trust her, so she said firmly. Let me ask a question first. Are you a man or a woman?" After hesitating, Jiang Hai decided to ask clearly. "Of course I am a woman, you can't be. I'm just a guide, okay?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl couldn't help but take a step back. Then she looked at Jiang Hai with some vigilance. Does this guy have any bad intentions towards me? Cough, I am not interested in you. It's just the name Kevin Carter. Hee, it seems to be a boy's name. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled and gestured. Belle also shrugged. It was indeed a boy's name. What? It's a boy's name? Oh my god. Paulo, you bastard. The girl was stunned when she heard Jiang Hai's words. Then she turned her head and yelled at the other girl sitting next to her. It seemed that she was the one who came up with the name. Chapter 486. Hey, you haven't said if you want us or not. After playing around for a while, the girl named Kevin Carter came over and looked at Jiang Hai with some anger. Because of the play just now, the girl's face couldn't help sweating a little. Because her skin color is a little dark, even if she blushes, Jiang Hai can't see it. You? Didn't you just say yourself? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment and said to her. I thought about it, if there is such a good yacht to sit on, it wouldn't be good if I don't take them, so I decided to take them, but they don't need money, even if it's just for a ride, I'll be the only one making money. How about it? If you miss this opportunity, there won't be another one. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kevin, Carter said with a serious face, as if Jiang Hai really took a big advantage. Looking at her, Jiang Hai smiled, these girls are really funny. Hey, little beauty, don't tell me you like our boss. It's right to like him, young, rich, and handsome, tsk. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't speak, Belle Lester couldn't help but tease Kevin, Carter. Like him? How is that possible? Glancing at Belle with disdain, Kevin said with a look of displeasure. Since you don't like our boss, then you must like me if you want to get on our boat. Speaking of this, Belle deliberately wiped his hair and said in a showy manner. Then I like him. But unfortunately, Kevin didn't give him a chance to be narcissistic and turned her head and said directly. Thank you. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile, it's actually good to attack this Belle. Hey, if you don't like me, and you don't like our boss, then why do we have to use you? Hearing her words, Bale was a little annoyed. He slammed the table and said to her, don't worry. What? Even as a tour guide, there are still unspoken rules. Perhaps once you Americans reveal your identity, there will be plenty of women who want to accompany you because they want the money in your pockets. However, we don't care about your pocket money. If you really want us to accompany you, it's not impossible. Bring us to America, bring us, and we'll accompany you. After Kevin finished speaking, his originally playful gaze instantly brightened. If these people could really take him to America, then there was nothing wrong with accompanying them. However, when he heard his words, Jiang Hai chuckled. He wasn't that interested in these things that had a price tag. Forget it. I don't want to take you to the United States for the time being. However, if you want to be a guide, I can consider it. Tell me your price. Jiang Hai gently knocked on the table, attracting everyone's attention, and then asked. When they heard Jiang Hai's words, the guests at other tables in this restaurant couldn't help but sigh. Everyone knows that it's a good job to be a guide for these Americans. Not only can they sit on a big boat, but they also have good food to eat. The most important thing is that these Americans are very generous, especially this young man. He can drive such a good yacht here, which proves that this guy is not short of money. However, they still opened their mouths too late, and these little girls snatched the business away. I just said, even if the three of them go out to play, I only charge $100, no, $50. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kevin said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai touched his chin. $50? That's not expensive or cheap. However, Jiang Hai didn't care. He came out to fish for tuna for nothing more than to have fun. Since she can come and help, Jiang Hai didn't care. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai nodded and then said, I can give you $50, but there's a problem. I don't know if you're bluffing me or not. If the place you take us to tomorrow has a good harvest, not to mention $50, even $100 is fine. But if we're not satisfied, then I don't want $50. Kevin waved her hand. In fact, this matter didn't have any loss for her. After all, even if she didn't spend money, it was a very good deal for her to go on a trip on the boat. After all, they had nothing to do. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was too lazy to argue with this little girl. He smiled and nodded in agreement. I'll look for you on your boat at 6:00 tomorrow morning. Remember to get up early, or you won't be able to catch a big fish. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, the girl immediately smiled and responded. After making a face at the three girls at the table next to her, she slapped a few dollars on the table, which was the money they had to pay for the meal, and then quickly ran away. Looking at the appearance of these girls, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He was happy to help others. boss? Do you like them? Seeing Jiang Hai's smile, Belle said with a sly smile. Like your head. Jiang Hai gave the guy with a crooked smile a middle finger and continued to sit there and wait. Not long after, half of the fish was served. Just as the waiter said, most of the food here could only be eaten in 4 ways. This half of the fish wasn't small, so they also cooked it in 4 ways: stewed, roasted, boiled, and fried. Although it looked very strange, the taste was still acceptable except for the fishy smell. Puerto Rico's way of eating is a mix of South America and the United States. Americans eat sweet and sour, while South Americans eat sweet and spicy. So these 3 fish were almost all sour, sweet, and spicy. Although the taste was a bit strange, it had a different flavor. After eating a little, they packed up the rest. These were to be taken back to the boat for Azalina and the others. After eating, they didn't immediately return to the boat. Instead, they strolled around the town because they still had a lot of things to buy. The captain of the guards said that oil could be added at the dock, but they still had to prepare other things. For example, fresh water, some famous fruits, cocoa, and some beer. Because sailing at sea was very boring, the consumption of these things was not small because there was really nothing to do. There was no internet or Wi-Fi at sea. Jiang Hai had a satellite TV, but he could only watch it. When there was nothing to do, it was a good choice to drink a little at sea, so Jiang Hai and the others consumed a lot of alcohol. This time, they naturally consumed a lot of alcohol in Puerto Rico. So after shopping around, they came to the only bar in the town. As soon as they walked in, they heard a lot of noise coming from inside. Of course, this noise didn't come from the music, but from the guests in the bar. When Jiang Hai and Belle walked in, many people saw them, but unlike the people in the restaurant, who were full of curiosity, the people here continued to talk loudly after glancing at Jiang Hai and the others. Glancing around the bar, the environment of this bar was not very good. Many men were crowded in this small bar, either bragging or flirting with girls. The smell of alcohol mixed with the smell of sweat became the main theme in this small space. Among these people, there were many young girls squeezed among these men. They didn't care about the smell of these men. Instead, they thought it was the smell of men. If they took a fancy to one, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't go home at night. This was a Western bar, and Jiang Hai was not interested in it. However, looking at the bar, everything was quite complete, so after Jiang Hai entered, he sat directly in front of the bar. What do you want? Looking at Jiang Hai sitting here, the bartender, who was mixing drinks, asked Jiang Hai in curly English. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai understood what he meant. 2 glasses of the best wine you have here. Jiang Hai looked at the man, smiled, took out a grant, $50, and stuffed it into the wine glass next to him. He had already seen the sign hanging behind the bartender. The best wine only cost $12 a glass. Jiang Hai gave more as his tip. Seeing this, the man couldn't help but laugh and immediately began to mix the drinks. Hey, boss, the girls here are so hot. At this time, Belle also patrolled around, sat next to Jiang Hai, and said excitedly. Along the way, this guy can be regarded as the little prince of the nightclub. His recognition was not ordinary. No matter how hot you are, you should pay attention to it. Don't cause trouble. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai knew that this guy was not going to go back to the boat at night, but it didn't matter. With his skills, Jiang Hai was not worried that he would suffer. Don't worry, boss. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Belle also knew that Jiang Hai allowed him to take a break. His eyes lit up instantly. At this time, the bartender just finished mixing 2 glasses of wine and placed them on the bar. Belle took one with a smile and rushed towards the group of girls in the distance. Looking at the girls over there, he exclaimed in surprise, "Wow, beauties, are you playing do di ju?" Do Diju was taught by Jiang Hai to Delina and the others, and they somehow passed it to Robbins Garcia and the others. Then, everyone in his manner learned it. But at this time, it was obvious that Do Diju had not spread to Puerto Rico yet. Wow, I'm very interested in what you're playing. Can you teach me, please? Hearing that they were not playing Do Diju, Belle's face flashed a trace of embarrassment. Of course, this trace of embarrassment was definitely faked by him. Stupid, how could the five of them play Do Diju together? But this guy was really good at acting. He took the opportunity to pretend to be pitiful. Seeing that this handsome blonde American was so interested in their game, these girls also pulled him in. Chapter 487. Listening to Belle's flirting skills, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. He really didn't care. Although Jiang Hai is a casual person, under normal circumstances, he won't be too casual, especially when the situation is not very clear, so he just looked at the people in the distance who are fighting, then picked up the wine in front of him and took a sip. "Brother, what good wine do you have here?" Looking at the bartender who is still playing with the glasses, Jiang Hai asked him. "Beer or white wine?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the bartender looked at him and asked. For Jiang Hai, a customer who is willing to spend money, his attitude is very good, and his face is smiling. Of course, the white wine in his mouth is not the white wine in China, but the foreign wine. "Either is fine, I'll ask first." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to him. "Beer is mainly bottled Corona and Buheimer, and we also have homemade beer, and it's very cheap, but I advise you not to try it, because you may not be used to it. As for white wine, we mainly sell rum here. If you want, the quality of this thing is quite good." Looking at Jiang Hai, the bartender here said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also touched his chin. He has heard of Corona and Buheimer before. But he really hasn't tasted them before. He remembered that he saw a post on the internet, mainly introducing the top 10 best-selling beers in the world. Among them, the most powerful is Wuxia's Snow, which has been ranked first in the world for many years. Of course, the main sales target is the Chinese. In foreign countries, especially in the Western world, almost no one knows what kind of beer Snow is, and few people have drunk it. Everyone agrees that the best-selling beer in the world is Budweiser light beer, which is also rare in China. Because it is a very light beer, and there is a clear lemon flavor. It is more like a cocktail than a beer, but it has the taste of beer. The 8% concentration is very good, and it is somewhat similar to the fruit beer in China. Jiang Hai also likes this beer. He bought this beer when he was in the United States. In third place was the normal Budweiser beer, and in fourth place was Corona beer. The origin of this beer was Mexico. It tasted similar to light beer, but the concentration was slightly higher. If anyone could drink light beer, then this wine would make people unknowingly drink too much. However, this beer brand was later acquired by Budweiser. Currently, it was mainly sold in the American market, especially in the southern part of the country. Ranked 5th is Shirao beer. This beer is not a major brand in the US, UK, or Wuxia. Few people had seen this beer. Its main markets were Africa and South America, but it was not available in Puerto Rico either. In 6th place was Heineken. There was no need to introduce them further. In 7th place was Silver Bullet. Not many people knew about this brand, but their sales in the US were the second highest in China. Currently, they had not expanded overseas, so not many people knew about them. In 8th place was Merlot beer, and in 9th place was Buheimer beer. Their main market was South America, and their biggest market was Brazil. During the World Cup last year, this beer was really popular for a while. The beer in 10th place was called Asahi beer. Needless to say, this name represented its main market and origin, Japan. So now that he heard the bartender's words, Jiang Hai was really interested. "Give me a glass of each of the 3 beers you mentioned, and give me a glass of rum." Jiang Hai looked at the bartender in front of him and smiled. The bartender's reaction was not slow. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he had already poured a glass of each beer for Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai drank the locally brewed beer first. But when it was imported, Jiang Hai almost spat it out. "It tastes terrible, right? There's nothing we can do about it. We lack fresh water here, and we even have to import it from overseas. Everyone's daily consumption of fresh water is limited, so the water used to brew this beer is evaporated from the ocean. It's no wonder it tastes good. If it weren't for the fact that this beer is cheap, we wouldn't drink it." The bartender looked at Jiang Hai and smiled as he explained. Puerto Rico is a country with a poor economy. They had declared bankruptcy in 2012, which was why they wanted to join the United States so badly. But the US is a group of tycoons, and they will not agree if there are no benefits. Puerto Rico had no specialties, and it was not a strategic location. Third, the only influential voting rights, customs, and defense in the world were all in the hands of the United States. They did not need this country to become their 51st state, because it would not create any wealth for them. Moreover, there would be an additional 1.8 million unemployed people. What would happen to Social Security then? What about medical insurance? What about the residents? Just the government's expenses are a huge sum of money, and the US does not have much ambition for their country. They were not like the Russians. They only cared about money. If they were willing, North America would have already belonged to the Americans. Canada and Mexico are not a problem. Maybe they have fought all the way to South America, and they do not have any concept of glory. Okay. After wiping his mouth, Jiang Hai put the glass of beer on the table, then picked up the 2 bottles and drank. He took a sip of Corona, and it was not bad. It was similar to light beer, but the alcohol content was slightly higher. This is not bad. The taste of Bahamas is very strong. It is not a light beer, but an ordinary beer. Jiang Hai put it down after 2 sips. Then he tasted the rum, which made his eyebrows twitch. It was said that South America was the country of rum. Jiang Hai took a sip and felt that it was really good. South American rum was mostly brewed with sugar cane, so it had a sweet taste in its own body. When it is drunk, it is not so strong, and it is not as spicy as American rum or vodka. Instead, it is delicious when it is drunk, and it explodes in the stomach, making the body feel warm. This is quite to Jiang Hai's taste, so he looked at the bartender and took out a few $100s from his pocket. "Give me 3 boxes of Corona, and 10 bottles of this rum," Jiang Hai said to the bartender in front of him with a smile. "That's $315 in total. I'll charge you $300. Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted to buy so much, the bartender laughed. Then Jiang Hai took out 3 Franklins and slapped them on the table. The other waiters had already brought the wine out. Of course, they also had to help carry the wine to the side of the boat. For this, Jiang Hai gave the young man a tip of $5. Fei carried 2 boxes of wine, and Jiang Hai carried 1 box of wine, 10 bottles of rum, the things they bought, and dinner. The 2 of them came to the side of his boat. As for Bell, let him go crazy here. He probably won't cause trouble. After delivering the things to the place, Jiang Hai also gave the waiter $5 and let him leave. Jiang Hai called down Harriman ferns, and the 2 of them carried the things up. At this time, the 4 people on the boat had already eaten dinner, but they were still quite interested in the local specialties that Jiang Hai brought back. They were quite happy after eating. They played here until around 10 o'clock, before Jiang Hai drove them back to their rooms to sleep. He also went to sleep. He didn't forget that the girl named Kevin said that they would come over at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. It was a quiet night. Although Bell was a little wild, he didn't stay overnight and came back around midnight. After Jiang Hai knew that he was back, he slept even more soundly. When the sun slowly rose from the sea level the next day, Jiang Hai also woke up from his sleep. Walking out of the room, the sea breeze outside blew, and Jiang Hai instantly woke up a lot. Because he had lived by the sea for so long, Jiang Hai was also very familiar with the big temperature difference by the sea. The two places with the biggest temperature difference in the world were the desert and the sea. In the desert, because the sand didn't absorb heat, it reflected heat during the day, so the temperature in the desert was very high. However, at night, because the sand didn't absorb heat during the day, there was no sun at night, and no heat was emitted, so it was very cold. The sea was similar to the desert, and the temperature difference was also quite big. Getting up in the morning, even Jiang Hai couldn't help but have goosebumps all over his body. Fortunately, he was prepared and put on his coat. Looking at the foggy sea in the distance, Jiang Hai walked to the plate armor. After adapting for a while, he began to move. By the time he finished his activities at 5:50, the fog on the surface of the sea has almost dissipated. It seems that today's weather is good. The sun shines on the sea, making the sea clear. Even Jiang Hai's boat has a lot of small fishes. "Hey, handsome, you're so early." Just as Jiang Hai was about to move and wake everyone up, a bell-like voice rang out. Then Jiang Hai looked over and saw the girl named Kevin, who he met last night. She was walking over with 4 other girls. The 4 girls were wearing the same clothes as last night. However, each of them was carrying a small bag. Seeing Jiang Hai standing there, they waved their hands vigorously. "Come on up." Seeing the arrival of the 4 girls, Jiang Hai also waved to them and put down the stairs on the boat. Not long after, the girls climbed onto Jiang Hai's boat. Looking at the luxurious yacht in front of them, their eyes couldn't help but be particularly bright. Speaking of which, these girls were playing on such a beautiful yacht for the first time. Looking at the bright eyes of these girls, Jiang Hai smiled and said to them, "You can rest in the living room first. You can watch TV here. I'll wake my people up and then make breakfast. We'll go after eating." Chapter 488. Whatever you say, boss. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl named Kevin from yesterday also said excitedly. When Jiang Hai went to the cabin to call them, these girls were also very bold, regardless of whether Jiang Hai is a bad guy or not. They just sat directly on the sofa of Jiang Hai's yacht, feeling the touch of the leather sofa under their buttocks. It really made them extremely excited. They have never been to such a good place before. Just as they were touching here and there and looking around curiously, Jiang Hai had also called Delina and the others. After everyone got up, they first went to wash their faces and brush their teeth, then Delina and Marian went to help Jiang Hai make breakfast. As for Belle, Azalina, and Harriman also came to the living room. When Belle saw these girls, his eyes narrowed and he greeted them with a smile. Unfortunately, these girls were not very interested in Belle. Only one of them smiled and nodded to him as a greeting. The other 3 girls directly ignored him and whispered to each other. Not long after, Jiang Hai and the others came out with a large pot of soup. This is the first dish Jiang Hai learned to make after coming to the United States, besides frying steak, cheddar soup. Speaking of this soup, it is a very famous food in the Boston area. This thing is traditionally called New England clam cheddar soup, but after coming to Boston, you can actually put anything you want in it. Even if you want to put lobsters, crabs, and other things in it, you can put them in. Jiang Hai put some big shrimps this time. Compared to clams, he prefers to eat these things. Of course, there are also chopped abalone, sea cucumber slices, and some clam meat in it. Of course, there are also dough balls in it. If you just drink the steam, you won't be full. This is the first time Kevin and the others drank this kind of soup. After drinking it, they couldn't help but give Jiang Hai a thumbs up. It really tastes good. After all, Jiang Hai's products are all things he brought from his manor. We're full, so we're about to set off. Tell me, where should we go? Not long after, the meal was almost finished. Kevin's 3 companions were still very conscious. They knew that after eating Jiang Hai's food, it was necessary to help clean up. So after everyone finished eating, they carried their bowls into the kitchen, and Jiang Hai asked Kevin, "What is it?" "That depends on what you want to catch. If you want to catch tuna, you have to drive east. If you want to catch lobsters, you have to drive southeast." Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin stood up, picked up his phone, and zoomed in on the screen. Then, he told Jiang Hai about it. It seems that she really knows the environment here very well. According to her, different fish go to different waters. The barracuda had to go to the northeast, and the tuna had to go to the east because the sea there was deeper and there were more tuna. Not only were there ordinary tuna, but there were also many bluefin and yellowfin tuna. However, there was a problem. If they caught these fish, it would be troublesome to sell them. Although there were people who collected fish in Puerto Rico, the price was not high. If you want to sell them at a high price, you have to go back to Miami to sell them. The price difference is about 20%. Jiang Hai doesn't care about this, because this is not his main purpose. If he really catches a rare fish, then he can also chill the fish or freeze it directly. Of course, the price will be reduced if he freezes it. However, Jiang Hai doesn't care about the small amount of money. He has enough bluefin tuna in his fishing farm. He came here to have fun. After confirming that he caught tuna, Jiang Hai also started the engine. After Bell went to the shore to untie the rope, he quickly rushed back to the boat. Then, the boat rushed to the east as Kevin said. With the departure of the ship, the fog on the surface of the sea completely dispersed. The warm sunlight shone on the sea. The sea absorbed a small amount of heat, but most of it was reflected into the air, causing the temperature of the sea to rise rapidly. At 8:30 a.m., the temperature outside had already reached 20 degrees Celsius. Seeing this, Kevin and the other girls couldn't sit still in the living room anymore. Therefore, they directly took off their jackets and trousers in front of Delina, Marion, Azaviel, Harriman and Belle. In a split second, they had already put on a set of bikini swimsuits. Are you going out to swim? The boat is still sailing. Looking at them, Delina felt that it was necessary to remind these girls who were about the same age as her. Of course not. Although the weather outside is hot, the sea water is still very cold. We are preparing to go fishing. We took off our clothes because it would be troublesome if we accidentally fell into the sea or got scratched. Hearing Delina's words, Kevin also smiled and said with a serious expression on his face. Fishing? Okay, I'll call Jiang. Hearing that they were going to start fishing, Delina was stunned for a moment. Then, she ran to the captain's cabin to call Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai was also interested in fishing. After setting the coordinates and letting the boat sail automatically, Jiang Hai took his fishing equipment and walked out of the cabin. Although Jiang Hai hadn't fished for tuna before, Edward Anderson and the other old sailors were experts in fishing for tuna. Therefore, they have already prepared everything for Jiang Hai to fish for tuna. For example, there are 5 or 6 poles with thick fishing lines and bait that tuna likes. Now the boat is still sailing, although the speed is not particularly fast. However, it was impossible to use 5 or 6 fishing rods directly, so Jiang Hai could only use 1 fishing rod. However, Jiang Hai wasn't very clear about what he was going to catch. He just walked out with a fishing rod. Hey, boss, what are you doing? Seeing Jiang Hai walking out with a long fishing rod, Kevin and the others who had climbed onto the platform at this time couldn't help but ask strangely. Didn't you say that you were going to fish? I'm here to join in the fun. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be speechless. What do they mean? Do they mean that they don't want me to join in the fun? It really makes him a little embarrassed. The boat hasn't stopped yet. How can you catch anything with this fishing rod? Is there any other seaweed? We are fishing for some bait now. You see, we all use this. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin couldn't help but laugh. Then he opened his small bag and took out a lot of bundles of lines from it. These lines are fishing lines, but they are very thick and have at least 50 or 60 pounds of tension. Generally, this kind of line is not very common in sea fishing. On the heads of these lines, there are a few big fish hooks tied with some silk threads and lead. What's going on? Jiang Hai has seen fake bait before. But at least, no matter how fake the bait is, it should at least look like a small fish or a worm. What the hell is this colorful line? As if seeing the doubts in Jiang Hai's eyes, Kevin also explained. Here, we use this thing to fish. The fish caught with this thing is the bait, and then we use this bait to catch the big fish. Hearing her explanation, Jiang Hai was even more confused. What's going on? Facts speak louder than words. Looking at Jiang Hai's confused look, Kevin and the others didn't care. They just smiled and tied the end of the rope to a fixed place on the floating platform. Then they threw the money into the sea and didn't care about it anymore. Looking at their appearance, Jiang Hai held the fishing rod and didn't know whether to move forward or retreat. It was quite awkward. But soon, he was not embarrassed anymore. Just as he was about to take the fishing rod back, a girl who was with Kevin suddenly laughed and shouted, then began to pull a fishing line back. Seeing her actions, not only Jiang Hai, but everyone else on the boat looked at her in surprise. She took the bait? Yes, she took the bait. As the girl pulled hard, a small fish about 20 centimeters long was pulled to the shore by her. Looking at this fish, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be taken aback, because this fish is not someone else. Although it is very small, Jiang Hai can recognize that this is a tuna, but it is not an expensive species. Now it is pulled to the platform, it is still moving there. Wow, it's really a fish. You guys are amazing. Are we going to eat this for lunch today? Looking at the tuna they caught, Delina and Marian also ran down and asked them with envy. Of course not. Of course not. Look at this fish, it's called Little Ledney. Look at the tire pattern on both sides of it. This fish can't be eaten. This kind of tuna doesn't grow big and its meat is very old. It tastes like a cooked tire. This is the bait for us to catch the big fish later. Hearing Delina's words, Kevin explained to her with a smile. Hearing her words, Delina was also very excited. Seeing their eager look, the girls here took the initiative to take out 4 fishing lines for them. After taking the fishing lines in their hands, Delina and Marian also sat on the floating platform. After learning from these girls, they fixed the fishing line on the floating platform and pulled it from time to time. Then they also chatted with each other. After all, these girls are about the same age, so they still have some common topics to talk about. As for Jiang Hai, after seeing that they can really catch a fish, he was already a little ashamed. He smiled awkwardly and took the fishing rod back to the cabin. It's better for him to sail the boat. As for Delina and Marian, with Azalina watching over them, nothing will happen. But at the same time, Jiang Hai also made a decision in his heart. It seems that fishing like this is quite interesting. After these little girls get off the boat, when he has time, he will also try it out. Without a fishing rod, without a bait, can he really catch fish? It's wonderful to think about it. Chapter 489. Wow, another one, another one. As another small tuna was pulled up, Daliana exclaimed excitedly. Hearing her voice, the girls around her also smiled kindly. Good job. At this time, a girl sitting next to her who came with Kevin said to Daliana in very stiff English. Hearing her words, Daliana also smiled. They had been fishing here for almost half an hour. Because they didn't need to check whether the bait was still there or not, after all, the silk thread wouldn't disappear. They just needed to pull it from time to time to see if the pulling force was right. If the pulling force was right, they would directly pull it up, and there was a high chance that they would catch a fish. Although only half an hour had passed, at this time, there were already a lot of fish in the fish trough behind these girls. Of course, they were all small tunas. The speed of the boat wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. Most of the fish couldn't catch up with the boat, but tunas were the fastest fish in the ocean, so it wasn't troublesome for them to catch up with the boat. It was precisely because of this that the fish they caught were basically small tunas. In addition, there was only a small octopus, which was probably hung on the hook and was pulled up. Young people always made friends quickly. In this half an hour, Kevin, Daliana, and Marian had basically become good friends. They also knew some of their situation. For example, they weren't Jiang Hai's women, but Jiang Hai's daughters. They lived in Boston, but didn't go to school. They also knew the situation of Kevin and Marian. These 4 girls were from a small town. Except for Kevin, they also knew the names of the other 3 girls. However, these 3 girls didn't speak too often. This was because their English was similar to the English of ordinary students in Wuxia. It was written in English, which was very troublesome to speak. Therefore, they spoke very slowly, and sometimes it was easy to get the meaning wrong. However, Daliana didn't care about it. No matter what it was, as long as they could speak it, it would be enough. As for why Kevin's English was so good, it was because her cousin had emigrated to the United States. That family was quite impressive. When she returned to China, she never spoke Spanish. She only spoke English, but it also helped her practice her spoken English. Kevin's English was quite famous in the small town. It was precisely because of her good English that it was not difficult for Kevin to find a job in Puerto Rico. They were now studying in high school in Puerto Rico. However, they would graduate in a year. After graduation, these girls would have to look for jobs. They wouldn't consider going to college. Besides, there weren't any good universities in Puerto Rico. Unless Puerto Rico could join the United States next year, but that was also impossible, and they knew it very well. Wow, it's really hard to imagine that that guy is actually your father. I'll say something that might cause you to misunderstand. I really thought that he found you. Hee, you know, but how could he adopt you? You should know that the 2 of you are not that far apart. He is also a young man with that kind of ability. Aren't you afraid of being taken advantage of if you live with him? After watching Daliana take the fish and throw the fishing line back into the sea, Kevin asked strangely. I've seen some cartoons and movies before. They always say that single men or women who adopt children have some ulterior motives. At this moment, a girl next to her also whispered. Ulterior motives. Hee, I know what you are talking about, but Jiang is not that kind of person. Don't worry, if he wanted us, he would have done it a long time ago. We don't hate him. If he needed us, we would have given it to him a long time ago. Daliana didn't care about Kevin and her companion's questions. After a chuckle, she began to explain. What she said was also the truth. Although she still didn't understand what dependence, what worship, what liking, and what love was, deep in her heart, she didn't feel disgusted doing some shameful things with Jiang Hai. Americans are really... Okay, forget we said anything, but why don't you go to school? You can make a lot of friends if you go to school. Looking at the slightly addicted eyes of Daliana and Marian, Kevin shrugged and wisely changed the topic. However, this topic was obviously not something that Daliana could talk about because it involves a secret. According to the place marked by Kevin, Jiang Hai's ship sailed for about an hour and arrived at the sea area. At the same time, Jiang Hai also took out the map in his mobile phone and took a look. The map he took was naturally the location of those shipwrecks. This tuna spot was about 5 nautical miles away from the location of the shipwrecks. The place was really not far. Of course, it was definitely impossible to go there during the day, but Jiang Hai was prepared to come back at night to take a look. As the ship slowly stopped, everyone also came to the floating platform. Jiang Hai glanced at the harvest of these girls, and he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Because these girls really harvested a lot of small tuna. There were more than 100 of them, almost filling up the tank. When the ship stopped, Kevin and the others had already stood up. Although the other 3 girls weren't as good as Kevin in terms of the position on the sea, they also grew up in this small town after all. They were still very good at dealing with fish. After standing up, they each took out a knife from their bag. They directly killed the fish, then cut off the fish head, pulled out the internal organs and put them aside. After that, they directly cut the fish into 2 pieces. This was the bait used for fishing. Seeing their actions, Jiang Hai and the others also came down and began to help. It took almost another hour to finish more than 100 fish, and then they began to cut it. For example, if you are fishing for barracuda, this fish's mouth is not small, but it likes to bite, so when fishing for this kind of fish, the meat has to be more square. If you are fishing for loach, this fish's face is very flat, so you have to cut it thinner. If you are fishing for black tuna, another name for bluefin golden spear, this fish is very big, so you need to cut the fish into bigger pieces. I know there are a lot of black tuna around here, but whether you can catch them depends on the situation. As for these internal organs and minced meat, they are the key to attracting these fish. While cutting the fish pieces, Kevin introduced them to Jiang Hai. I really don't understand this very well, this is your problem as a guide. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled. He really didn't understand this, but he was a little lucky to have hired a reliable guide. Then listen to me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin smiled and then began to throw the internal organs and minced fish pieces into the sea. Jiang Hai knew that she was luring the fish over. Some fish are purely carnivorous, some are omnivorous, but no matter what kind of fish it is, they all eat fish. Especially internal organs with blood, there is no animal that doesn't like to eat them, because these internal organs contain a lot of calories and fat, which is different from humans. Animals like these things very much. With these messy things thrown into the sea, it didn't take long for a large number of fish under the sea to be attracted. Of course, the fish that came over were just some small fish, the most numerous of which were small fish such as anchovies and herring. And these small fish are the main source of food for large fish. Seeing that the small fish began to pile up, these girls also picked up the fish pieces they liked and strung them on the fishing line they brought. Jiang Hai also set up the 6 rods and put the largest piece of fish on them, waiting to catch tuna. Tuna won't be hooked so quickly. Are you sure you don't want to catch some barracuda or something to play with first? Looking at Jiang Hai's movements, Kevin asked him with a smile, but Jiang Hai didn't want to change the bait. He came here to fish for tuna and there was no need to fish for anything else. But this idea was shaken after 5 minutes because the girls over there took the bait. Wow! With the exclamation of one of the girls, a long fish that looked like a knife was pulled out of the water by her. This fish is not small, about 80 centimeters long. Its head is a bit like a hair tail, and it has a mouth full of big sharp teeth, but its body is much thicker than a hair tail. Seeing this fish on the fishing line, Delina and Marion immediately wanted to help their new friend, but before they went forward, Kevin had already stopped them. At the same time, they picked up the knife and directly smashed the fish to death with the back of the knife. After the fish stopped moving, they went forward to remove the hook. This fish is called barracuda, commonly known as sea wolves. It's very fierce. When this fish is in a group, even sharks don't dare to provoke them. Look at their big teeth. If you're accidentally bitten, you'll bleed. It's very troublesome. Seeing that the fish has been taken down, Kevin explained to Delina and the others why he didn't let them come forward to help. Hearing Kevin's words, Delina and the others also nodded. If Kevin didn't say it, they really wouldn't have known. Jiang Hai next to them was also a little embarrassed. In fact, he didn't know either, but now is not the time to expose himself, so he still prepared to fish for tuna very seriously. But an existence like tuna, which can almost be regarded as a top predator of the ocean, is really not so easy to appear. While Jiang Hai was waiting for tuna, Kevin and the others took the bait again, this time 3 barracuda in a row. Chapter 490. Barracuda, since they are called sea wolves, they do have some similarities with wolves. For example, they live in groups. Barracuda move in schools. If one is caught, it means that there is a school nearby. As the 3 fish were quickly pulled up, Kevin and the others continued to put down the fishing line. This time, Delina and the others also went to help. Watching them pull the fish up one by one, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. Azalina, Belle, and Harriman, who were not interested in the fish, also ran to the floating platform at this time. Helping to catch the fish is nothing more than waiting for the fish to be pulled up, then directly knocking the fish to death. They are very good at doing this. TSK, they are really King lucky. My fish, quickly take the bait. Looking at the fish being pulled up, Jiang Hai's face was expressionless, but he still cared a little in his heart. It's really shameful for him to lose to these little girls. However, it was a pity that fishing was not up to him. It would be strange if he could fish it up just because he said so. Because the bait on his fishing rod was too big, the sea wolves couldn't swallow the bait in one bite. If they didn't swallow the bait, then they wouldn't be able to catch the fish. Therefore, Jiang Hai quickly threw out several pieces of bait. However, he didn't manage to catch any big fish. This made Jiang Hai lose face. They are only catching small fish, I want to catch a big one. Looking at the barracuda that are still being pulled up, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and comforted himself with this reason. But at this moment, Kevin suddenly exclaimed in the distance. Then, under her forceful tug, a broad back appeared on the surface of the sea. Oh my God, this fish is so big. Hearing Kevin's exclamation, Delina and the others also looked over. But after seeing it, they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The size of the fish exposed at this time is about 1 meter, and the tail fin is not completely exposed, so they don't know the exact size, but at least they can be sure that this fish is definitely more than 1.5 meters long. A 1.5 meter long fish is already a big fish. Looking at the faint golden glow on the dorsal fin under the sunlight, Kevin and the rest's eyes lit up. Don't move, this is the yellowfin golden spear. It's too strong, we can't pull it up. Watching Delina, who was going to help him, Kevin threw away the string in his hand. After that, he took out a pair of thick working gloves from her bag and quickly put them on. After that, he took out a wooden stick and started to stir the string. One of her friends also put on a pair of gloves and began to fish. Anyone who had fished before would know that fishing in the sea was different from fishing in the river. This was because there were often some big and fierce fish in the sea. For example, tuna. This kind of fish was big and strong. If one used an ordinary fishing rod to catch it, it would be very difficult for people to grasp it. That was why there was the saying of fishing rods. Jiang Hai's 5 or 6 fishing rods were all fishing rods, but none of them have taken the bait yet. When such a big fish took the bait, what people had to do was to fight with the fish and consume most of the fish's strength underwater. Only then could the fish be brought up. However, although the tuna was not small, its endurance was not bad. But it wasn't a difficult fish to catch. First, it was because the fishing lines used by Kevin and the rest were quite thick, and there was no fishing rod. The tuna couldn't pull the boat away, nor did it have the strength to break the fishing rod. Second, this kind of fish can't jump. Jumping fish were more difficult to catch because when the fish jumped, the fishing line must be retracted instantly. Otherwise, the hook might fall off in the air. The most famous fish that can do this was the big sea silver carp, but this kind of fish didn't exist in the Atlantic Ocean. But even if it existed, Jiang Hai probably wouldn't fish it, because this kind of fish meat was soft and had a lot of bones. Fishing was a very good fish species, but it wasn't good for eating. The locals basically used it as salted fish when they caught it. On the other side, Kevin and her little friend had been fighting with this guy for about 20 minutes by the side of the boat. The struggle of the fish gradually slowed down. If they really went to Cape Cod like Edward Anderson said, it would be very troublesome to catch this kind of tuna. He also had to look at the fish's trajectory and pay attention when fishing. Generally speaking, when fishing for tuna, especially large tuna, there was a 60% chance that the fish would escape the hook, but it was precisely because of this that it was fun. When the fish was about 10 meters away from the boat, Kevin and the rest called Harriman to come over and help. After slowly pulling this guy to the side of the boat, Harriman was really powerful. With such a big body, its strength naturally wouldn't be small. It directly lifted the fish by its chin and dragged the huge yellowfin golden spear towards the ship's floating platform. After reaching the platform, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at it, his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. This tuna is about 1.8 meters long and weighs at least 130 kilograms. This is Harriman. Otherwise, if it was Bell, not to mention pulling the fish up, he would probably have to go down himself. Of course, Jiang Hai also has the strength to do so. It's not the biggest, but it's not small either. Hang it up and kill it. She quickly tied the fish's tail with a rope, and then put it on a crane above the plate armor of the boat. Kevin urged Bell to hang the fish up and told Harriman to kill it quickly. Harriman also took her knife and gestured there. As mentioned before, tuna breathed by crashing into a machine. Even if it was kept in a pool on the shore, it would die quickly. So what they had to do now was to drain its blood before it died. It was true that fish were cold-blooded animals, but it didn't mean that their blood was always cold. The so-called cold-blooded animals referred to the blood in their bodies, which would change according to the changes in the surrounding temperature. It didn't mean that their blood was cold. When they were fishing, the fish was constantly struggling. After exercise, people's blood would become hot, let alone fish. When the fish's blood was hot, if the fish died, the blood would enter the fish's meat and produce lactic acid, which would make the fish taste very bad, especially for tuna, which had to be eaten raw. Jiang Hai and the rest didn't know much about this, but fortunately, Kevin understood it very well. Under her command, Bell hung the fish up. Then Harriman killed the fish and drained its blood. After cleaning up the blood, Harmanli and Bell laughed. To be honest, they were just starting to feel the joy of having fun. In the first 8 days, it was basically Jiang Hai playing, and they just watched TV and enjoyed the scenery. Now that there was something they could do, they were still very happy. This fish is about 130 kilograms. According to our standards, if the meat is good, it can be sold for more than $1,000. Uncle, since this fish was caught on your boat, let's split it half and half. After thinking about it, Kevin looked at Jiang Hai and said excitedly. She went to sea with Jiang Hai and didn't care about the $50 guide fee. She was doing this for these fish. One must know that catching this fish is equivalent to her family's monthly income. No need, it's all yours. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also waved his hand. He didn't care about this small amount of money. What he cared about was that since Kevin and the others knew that he was the father of Delina and Marion, they no longer called him boss, but uncle. These guys really didn't learn anything good. Hearing Jiang Hai say that the money from selling the fish would be his, Kevin also narrowed her eyes and smiled. She immediately took Harriman and brought the fish into the ice room that Jiang Hai had prepared. There, Jiang Hai specially prepared a water silo for the fish that he caught. He put a lot of ice in it to keep the fish fresh and tender. Uncle, do you want me to give you a line? After working for a long time, Kevin also came out of the water silo. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little speechless, she couldn't help but tease Jiang Hai with a smile. In her opinion, Jiang Hai's fishing rods were useless. No need. Although they were having fun playing with each other, Jiang Hai also had self-respect. It was not so easy to make him surrender like this. But looking at the barracuda that filled the water tank and the yellowfin, Jiang Hai felt that if he continued to fish like this, it might be really difficult to get any fish. After thinking for a while, he took the fishing rod out of the water again, but this time, he didn't use the bait. Instead, he returned to the yacht's kitchen. When he reappeared, he had a piece of beef in his hand. Wow, beef, and it looks good. Uncle, you're not going to use this thing to fish, are you? Seeing Jiang Hai coming down with the fish, Kevin and the others couldn't help laughing and shouting. Of course, why not? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face. I'm not fishing for crocodiles. Tuna eat beef? Seeing that Jiang Hai was really going to fish with beef, the four girls here couldn't help laughing. They had never seen anyone use beef to fish for tuna. Let me show you. Hearing their laughter, Jiang Hai chuckled. Maybe fish don't eat beef, but that's ordinary beef. Is his beef an ordinary guy? This is his trump card. Jiang Hai cut off a piece of beef that weighed about 3 ounces. He hung it on the boat's pole and then threw it into the sea. This was his killer move. P.S. Below is the advertisement time. Because they are afraid that you can't see it, they posted it in the chapter. Of course, these words are free. I recommend XX God's competitive work, Super Trainer, the most awesome XXXXX competitive football novel. Friends who like to read this kind of novel must not miss it. Chapter 491. Hey, is your dear dad crazy? He actually wants to use beef to fish. Looking at Jiang Hai who had set the bait again, Kevin couldn't help but say to Daliana and Marion in surprise. Her words could be considered as a pun, because Delina and Marion really liked Jiang Hai. Using the term dear was indeed a bit, too ambiguous. As for whether she meant it or not, who knew? Hearing her words, Daliana and Marion's little faces couldn't help but blush, but they quickly recovered. You don't understand, just wait and see. Looking at Kevin, Daliana shook her head and said with great interest. It seems that you really don't understand fishing. The bait for fishing should be suitable, not how much it is worth. Hearing that the two sisters seemed to be very confident in Jiang Hai, this made Kevin a little speechless. Indeed, fishing should be about whether the bait was right or not how expensive the bait was. This was very clear to all experienced fishermen. For example, in China, there were many veteran cadres who liked to fish. And these people had already summed up a principle, they were very clear about what kind of fish liked to eat. As the old saying went, sing a song when you go to a mountain, and put the bait when you catch a fish. Grass roots, that is, grass carp like to eat various kinds of corn, vegetables, grass leaves, and other bait mixed together. Crucian carp like to eat red worms, steamed buns, and some insects. Carp like to eat snails, shrimps, earthworms, silkworms, pig hydrazine, raw meat, and so on. Black carp also like to eat insects, snails, small fish, shrimps, and so on. Tilapia, snakehead, fathead, catfish, all kinds of fish naturally liked to eat all kinds of things. The same was true for sea fish, and beef, was indeed not one of the usual things for fishing. Of course, it didn't mean that beef couldn't be caught. Beef could only be caught for those fish that weren't too picky. Those fish that were greedy, such as barracuda, still liked to eat beef very much. As for tuna, some of them weren't too picky, but Jiang Hai's target was bluefin or yellowfin, which were still very picky. Just wait and see. Our beef is not ordinary. Although they didn't know whether Jiang Hai's mystery had anything to do with this beef, Daliana and Marian trusted Jiang Hai from the bottom of their hearts. Moreover, they also knew that Jiang Hai's beef wasn't ordinary. If it was ordinary, would it be so expensive? One must know that the manor's main source of income came from the beef, not from selling fish. Alright, looks like you guys won't give up until all hope is gone. Let's wait and see. Seeing that the two little girls were so supportive of Jiang Hai, Kevin shrugged helplessly, indicating that he was waiting for a miracle to happen. However, just as her voice fell, before she could take a breath, Jiang Hai's fishing line had already snapped. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be happy. He knew that he got hooked. Then, he straightened the fishing rod in an instant, and then quickly turned the rollers. Jiang Hai and these girls had one thing in common, that is, he also liked violence. Moreover, ordinary fish really couldn't withstand his violence. He felt that the pulling force of this fish under the water at this time might be the strongest among all the fish he had ever caught. It was even stronger than the first time his big fool was hooked. But he was no longer the same person as before. In the past, he only had the strength of a human, but he could easily deal with this fish. Not to mention now, Jiang Hai directly picked up the fishing rod, then began to turn the rollers quickly. If the other fishermen saw him like this, their jaws would probably drop off in shock. What kind of joke is this? Usually, when people fight with fish, the person will drag the fish out of the water until it's tired. Jiang Hai is now directly forcing the fish out of the water. Is there a mistake? Is this a joke? When did the battle between a person and a fish become a competition of strength? And most importantly, when did a person on the shore have the strength of a fish? Seeing Jiang Hai pulling the fish back, Kevin and the others looked at each other. The other three girls curled their lips, because they thought that if the fish can be pulled back like this, it proves that the fish is not big. But Kevin faintly felt that something was wrong, because the fish stirred up a lot of waves in the distance. Just as she was a little curious, a long dorsal fin that was bigger than the one she had just caught emerged from the water. It shone with a strange golden light under the sunlight. Seeing this, her mouth couldn't help but turn into an O shape in surprise. Oh my God, it's also a yellowfin, and it looks like it's bigger than Kevin's. Seeing this scene, the three girls next to her were also stunned. What's going on? Is there anyone who can catch this kind of fish with pure strength? Simple and crude, without a trace of skill to speak of, but it still caught the fish. Looking at the straight line that was almost as thick as a chopstick, they couldn't help but sigh for the fish. This fellow was really unlucky to have provoked a humanoid magical beast. This yellowfin tuna is clearly not a good fish, and the most important thing is that it is still very strong. Jiang Hai did not slip away from it, nor did he fight it, but directly pulled it over. A tuna that can grow so big is destined to be not young, and it is very likely that it has been caught by others before. Seeing that it was not Jiang Hai's opponent and was getting closer and closer to the floating platform, the fish did not panic and run around. Instead, it accelerated and rushed to the bottom of the boat. This is also a trick of the tuna, rushing to the hull. If the fishing line is scratched by the bottom of the boat, it can be easily broken. Would Jiang Hai give it such a chance to escape? But would Jiang Hai give it such a chance? Looking at the yellowfin tuna drilling to the bottom of the boat, Jiang Hai shouted, "Get up!" At the moment when the tuna rushed over, Jiang Hai used his arms and directly swung the fishing rod. The tuna on this side did not think that it would be forcibly thrown out of the sea by others. With a bang, the fish has emerged from the sea, and then it was heavily thrown on the floating platform by Jiang Hai. However, although the fall was not light, the fish was still very tenaciously moving, hoping to return to the sea. But how can Jiang Hai give it such a chance? He went up and hit the guy's head directly with the rod, temporarily stunning the fish. Then he took the rope thrown over and put it on the fish's tail. He gestured to Belle, and Belle, who was still on the other side of the crane, immediately started the crane and pulled the tuna up. This time, Harriman, who was already experienced, stepped forward to bleed the fish. "Oh my God, Uncle, your fish is 2 meters long and at least 180 kilograms. How did you do it? Are you a human or a monster?" Looking at Belle and Harriman, who were dealing with the fish, Kevin walked over with a confused face and looked at Jiang Hai in disbelief. She had never seen anyone like Jiang Hai in her life. She was very sure that the meat of this fish must be about the same. If her fish could be sold for $1,000, Jiang Hai's fish could be sold for at least $1,000. She was a little happy just now, but now it seemed that this uncle really didn't lack her money. Of course, call me Uncle Monster in the future." Jiang Hai didn't care about being called uncle. He rubbed Kevin's head, who was already in a daze. Jiang Hai laughed, turned around, and was about to put the beef on the fishing rod again. But at this time, another fishing rod, which had already put the beef on it, began to turn around crazily again. There was no time to serve the beef. Jiang Hai went directly to the front of the fishing rod. Once again, he used the same trick. He lifted the fishing rod in an instant, straightened the line and began to reel in the line. These girls had already seen Jiang Hai's monstrous strength once, so they weren't surprised. But they all knew that Jiang Hai didn't catch a small fish, but an out-and-out big one. Looking at the fishing line that seemed like it would break at any time, they couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. When did fishing in the sea become so easy? For a 1.5-meter yellowfin, they wasted half an hour to get the fish. They also had to rely on Belle and Harriman to clean it up. Jiang Hai, on the other hand, only took a few minutes from the time the fish was hooked to the time he caught it. It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. As the fishing line got shorter and shorter, the dorsal fin of the big fish also appeared on the surface of the water. This time, when the sun shone, Kevin and the girls couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Because at this time, under the sunlight, the back of the fish was clearly dark blue. Black tuna, it's really a black tuna. Looking at the big fish in front of them, Kevin couldn't help but jump up and shout. Although today she was clamoring to bring Jiang Hai and the others to fish for the bluefin golden spear, to be honest, she didn't have much confidence in her heart. Ever since the bluefin golden spear became a supreme delicacy in the eyes of the Japanese, the number of people who caught the bluefin golden spear all over the world suddenly increased by several times, or even dozens of times. Just like the words on capital said, with so much profit, it would be strange if they didn't go crazy. But decades ago, to be exact, before the Japanese had become rich, World War I, World War II, and even after World War II, even in the 60s and 70s, this game was quite worthless. Some big fish farms would even mince this kind of fish and feed it to the chickens. In the past 30 years, the originally worthless bluefin golden spear had gradually reached the end of its road, and it had become a kind of economic protection fish species. This made some old fishermen couldn't help but feel that things were really unpredictable. P.S. During the advertisement time, I recommend the sports basketball novel, Basketball God, by Minced Meat and Big Eggplant. It is currently the top basketball novel on the website. It is the most awesome 6666666666666 sports basketball novel. If there are friends who like sports basketball, don't miss it. Chapter 492. He pulled the huge bluefin tuna out of the water with ease, and then did the same thing as before. He knocked it out with a stick, hooked its tail, drained its blood, and chilled it. Everything was so orderly. The only difference was that this fish was even bigger than the yellowfin that Jiang Hai caught just now. It was still 2 meters long and a little taller than Jiang Hai, but it weighed 200 kilograms. It was an out-and-out big fish. According to Kevin, the fish could be sold for at least $30,000. If it was sent directly to Japan, it would probably be sold for more than $50,000, but here, $30,000 was the highest price. Jiang Hai wouldn't go to Japan to sell fish for $20,000. The loss outweighed the gain. However, it turns out that bluefin are really rare. After Jiang Hai caught a huge bluefin tuna, he really didn't catch another bluefin tuna. He didn't even see a bluefin tuna that was more than a meter long. Although his beef was still very popular, his third fish was another yellowfin, and it was not small. The fourth fish was a shark, a bull shark. Unfortunately, this fish was a protected species in the Caribbean, and it was not allowed to be eaten even if it was caught. Therefore, Jiang Hai thought that saving a fish's life was better than building a 7-floor pagoda, so he let it go. The fifth fish he caught was an Atlantic sailfish, which was more than 2 meters long. It was not easy to see such a fish here. Jiang Hai still remembered that he once caught such a fish and sold it alive for $100,000. Unfortunately, there were fishing boats at that time, but Jiang Hai only had a yacht now, so he couldn't raise this fish. He could only kill it and drain its blood like a tuna, then chilled it. Anyway, it was a victory. After catching the fifth fish, Jiang Hai didn't want to use the hook again, because the warehouse he prepared was already full. After that, they had lunch at sea. It was a Caribbean-style lunch. Since it was Kevin and the others who were cooking, according to them, they could take them out to play. Most importantly, Jiang Hai said that the fish they caught belonged to them. This made them very excited, so they took the initiative to kill a few barracuda and made a Caribbean-style lunch. In fact, it was the same, just a simple meal. However, it was Jiang Hai's first time eating barracuda fish. He had to admit that the barracuda meat tasted pretty good. The meat of this kind of fish was similar to the garlic clove meat that was often mentioned in China, but it was shaped like strips. It tasted good, and the most important thing was that it was fresh and tender. After lunch, Jiang Hai and the others basked in the sun for a while. After chatting with each other for a while, they prepared to return. From here to the dock where Jiang Hai had set off, it took about 3 hours to drive slowly. Indeed, it was still early, but don't forget that they had to sell fish first, and the place to sell fish was on another dock. Under the guidance of Kevin, Jiang Hai drove the boat to the dock on the other side. After driving for about 2 hours, they saw the coastal dock. Compared to the dock in the town where Jiang Hai had stopped, this one was much bigger. Not only were there many high-rise buildings, but the greenery was also done well. On the dock, there were not only many large fishing boats, but also some small yachts, but compared to Jiang Hai's yacht, those were far worse. This is Wuxia, the biggest city in our area. It's also a good place for tourism. Looking at the huge dock in front of them, Kevin introduced it to Jiang Hai and the others. Hearing the envy in her words, Jiang Hai also smiled. She is still young now. Sometimes, the more prosperous the place, the better, at least Jiang Hai thinks so. As Jiang Hai's boat sailed into the port, many fishermen on the fishing boats here looked at them curiously. But compared to the surprise in the town where Jiang Hai had stopped, the people here were much more indifferent. Although Puerto Rico's economy was not good, although there was a shortage of fresh water, and although the people here were not very rich. However, it was the best choice for those who liked to travel but didn't have much money, and those who liked to emigrate but didn't have much money either. In many big cities in Puerto Rico, it was the place where millionaires with a net worth of around $1 million lived. $1 million was indeed a lot of money in the United States, but it was not a privilege at all. At most, you could be considered a white-collar worker with a better life, but $1 million was completely different in Puerto Rico. They used their American citizenship to buy houses and land here, and the local government did not dare to trouble them. With $1 million, they were rich in the local area. The quality of their spending here was very good, only $20 or $30 per visit, and not more than $100 per night. Of course, this was the information that Belle had found out last night, but Jiang Hai did not care. Because of the low price, the good familiarity, and the feeling of being superior, many Americans were willing to come here to play. Aguadilla was also a tourist destination, so naturally, there were many foreigners here. After Jiang Hai and the others sailed into the dock, they did not stop there directly. Instead, they drove directly to the fishing company. This was the first time Jiang Hai had gone to the fishing company, but the way the people here looked at him made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. Generally speaking, when a boat sailed into a fishing company, it must have gotten fish, which meant that they were competing with the fishermen here for business. However, the people here did not seem to care. In fact, it was understandable. There were plenty of fish in the sea, and Jiang Hai was driving a yacht. How many fish could he catch? However, when they saw the fish on Jiang Hai's boat, many of them would probably regret it. It was Jiang Hai's first time here, but Kevin was a local. He directly took Jiang Hai to a fishing company in Spanish. Jiang Hai did not know what the name was, but Kevin said that this was the fishing company with the highest price among all the nearby fishing companies. In the Caribbean, fishing companies were the only thing that was not lacking. After all, the people here relied on fishing to make a living. When Jiang Hai's boat docked next to the fishing company, some of the nearby boats stopped what they were doing and looked at Jiang Hai with a mocking expression. They thought that Jiang Hai had stopped by the wrong boat. It was a very happy thing to be able to see the rich suffer. However, when the fishing company's hook pulled out a large yellowfin golden spear from Jiang Hai's cabin, these people could not remain calm. There were sounds of gasps and discussions everywhere. Looking at their expressions, Jiang Hai smiled. He liked to see these people's surprised expressions. It was very interesting. Wow, the fish is not bad. It's A grade. I'll give you $6 per kilogram. What do you think? Looking at the scale in front of him, the person in charge of counting asked Jiang Hai. Before Jiang Hai came here, he had inquired about the A-grade yellowfin golden gun. In the United States, a pound of yellowfin golden gun was about $4. 1 kilogram was definitely more than 2 pounds, which was $8. But here, it was only worth $6. He glanced at Kevin. This fish was hers. Hearing this person's words, Kevin also calculated in her heart. Her fish was 130 kilograms in total. $6 per pound, that was $780. Although it was a little less than the $1,000 in her heart, it was still okay, so she nodded. Then it's settled. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person here weighed again. It was 138 kilograms in total. Just as the person here was about to count, a white and fat old man came out and said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "Let's say it's 140 kilograms. I saw that you have fish in your boat. Young man, I'll sell you a favor." Listening to the old man's words, Jiang Hai and the others were stunned for a moment, but it didn't matter. After all, they made more money. "Hello, are you Americans?" When Kevin went to the side to count the money, the old man also came over and asked Jiang Hai with a smile. Jiang Hai and the others also nodded. Listening to the old man's accent, he should also be an American. Oh, there are a lot of Americans here now. That's right, after all, it's tuna season. Huh, let me see what other good things you got. The old man heard Jiang Hai's words and said with a smile. At this time, Kevin had come back with an envelope. Needless to say, there must be cash in the envelope. Now that Puerto Rico is bankrupt, the banks here are useless. Except for Citibank's branch here, all the other banks have closed down. After all, Puerto Ricans who are not Americans don't trust Citibank very much. Compared to banks, they trust the cash in their hands more. What's more, taking the money directly can avoid taxes. Did you get the money? Seeing Kevin and the others happy, Jiang Hai also asked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin smiled and stuffed the money in the front of her jeans, putting it carefully. It can be seen that this girl is quite concerned about this money. Then, old man, come and see my other fish. Seeing Kevin stay by the side, Jiang Hai also smiled and gestured to Belle on the boat to continue selling fish. The next day, Jiang Hai caught a tuna. Seeing Jiang Hai's bigger yellowfin, the fishermen's voices became louder, but the old man's eyes were shining with a golden light. Sure enough, Jiang Hai's fish is bigger, 189 kilograms, 190 kilograms, still $6 per kilogram. More than $1,000 is not a small amount, but when the third one came out, these people were even more confused. When the fourth Atlantic sailfish came out, some people looked at Jiang Hai with envy. On the fifth day, when Jiang Hai's bluefin came out, the whole fishing company was quiet. Everyone was looking at Jiang Hai and the others with eager eyes. P.S. During the commercial break, I recommend friends to act cute. Invincible Little and Little Bow's similar farming novels, Golden Ranch. I don't need to recommend Fatty's Golden Fishery, it's much more popular than mine. Chapter 493. Hey, lucky boy, if I were you, I would return to the United States immediately after accepting the money. Looking at the accounts reported to Jiang Hai after the fish were weighed, the old man couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked around. As a result, he found that at this time around the fishing company, the fishermen who were originally gathered there were whispering in twos and threes. However, when they saw Jiang Hai's gaze, these people would turn their heads away. Although Jiang Hai didn't study psychology, he heard that when someone actively avoids your gaze, if this person doesn't like you, then this person has a guilty conscience. These fishermen naturally can't like Jiang Hai, so they have a guilty conscience. Why would someone who has never met feel guilty? That is, he is preparing to do something that he is guilty of. What? Is Puerto Rico also so lawless? Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai chuckled, then looked at his harvest today. Jiang Hai's fish today, the two yellowfin tunas, were not very valuable. The two fish were sold for less than $3,000. However, the Atlantic sailfish was sold for a good price, a total of $13,000. This is the difference between a live fish and a dead fish. A live fish can be sold for $100,000, but a dead fish is only worth a little more than $10,000. The most expensive one was the bluefin tuna, which Jiang Hai sold for a total of $27,000. In total, Jiang Hai's fish were sold for a total of $42,890. This money is already comparable to the annual income of a middle-class family in the United States. At the same time, this money is enough for the poor Puerto Ricans to target Jiang Hai. Lawless? You can also think of it this way. This is a very dangerous place to begin with. Although it's not like some countries in South America where the warlords are divided, the government can no longer control the whole country. If something really happens to you, as long as someone pushes the blame to the Americans, what was originally a civil case may be upgraded to a political case. You know, politics is a pool of dark water, and it's not that easy to clear it up. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the owner of the fishing company here said with a smile. Jiang Hai actually understood what he meant. Although Puerto Rico wasn't exactly lawless, it wasn't that far off. The whole country was divided into three parts. The first part was the pro-government party, which accounted for the largest proportion. These people were also the people who wanted to be integrated into the United States the most, so these people were envious of Jiang Hai, but would not do anything to him. The other group of people were those who didn't care. These people weren't short of money. They didn't think that not being annexed to the United States would have a big impact on their lives. Therefore, these people were basically the kind of people who abstained from voting during the election. The third part was the people who did not want to be integrated into the United States. Some of these people were nationalists, and some were people who held power in their hands. Now, it could be said that they held the power of life and death here. However, once they were integrated into the United States, everything would be done according to the rules of the United States. There would be elections and democracy, and then the power in their hands would disappear. Therefore, these people were the people who were most unwilling to be integrated into the United States. These people wanted to find people who would support them, and those desperados and extreme nationalists were their best choice. These people were basically in jobs that were not very good, and they did not earn much money. For money, they would do anything. Fortunately, such people were only 5% of the people in the country. However, there were also 1.8 million people in Puerto Rico, and 5% of the 1.8 million people were only 90,000 people. If they were spread out across the country, naturally, it was not a lot. However, it was hard to say if 90,000 people were to deal with Jiang Hai. If something really happened to Jiang Hai here, the Puerto Rican government only needed to say that these people were against being integrated into the United States, and the United States would basically let it go, because it was impossible for them to send troops to attack Puerto Rico. At most, they would push Puerto Rico further away and prevent them from joining the United States. The Puerto Ricans had even tried to assassinate the President of the United States. In the end, other than killing a group of people, nothing else was done. That was why it was said that politics was the dirtiest thing in the world. Some people would say that if these people were against being integrated into the United States, then with the old man's identity, wouldn't he be afraid that his fishing company would be smashed? Afraid? Of course, he would be afraid. However, it was impossible for such a big fishing company to not have someone behind it. Those in power knew that if they touched these companies, the United States government would not be affected. However, it was hard to say if those mercenaries or assassins would come knocking on their door. Some money could be used, but some couldn't. If they used the wrong money, they might not be able to spend it. They weren't in the Terra Syndicate's headquarters. If I were you, I would first replenish the fresh water here, then leave and return to the United States immediately. I can guarantee your safety here, but if you go outside, I don't know. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to have noticed the movements of the fishermen outside, the old man did not say much. He just whispered to Jiang Hai. However, would Jiang Hai be afraid? Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai smiled softly. Thank you, uncle, but if they have the guts to come, then let them come. Looking at the fishermen outside, Jiang Hai chuckled, then took the bag of money, walked out of the sea company, and then took everyone back to the boat. After arriving on the boat, Jiang Hai also started the engine and headed to the port where he stopped last night. About an hour or so, Jiang Hai's boat also stopped at the port. The port guard captain was naturally very welcoming. After asking him to refill the boat and refuel it, Jiang Hai got off the boat with Belle Lester. As for Kevin and the others, they had already gone back. Today, they also sold the barracuda they caught. Including the yellowfin, they got a total of more than $1,000. After each of them got more than $300, they happily went home. After all, for them, they were just here to be tour guides, and other things had nothing to do with them. However, if Jiang Hai and the others were still here tomorrow, then they were willing to continue to be tour guides for Jiang Hai and the others. Tomorrow, they could go catch lobsters to eat. Jiang Hai also smiled at this. After giving each of them $100, he made an appointment to go with them tomorrow. He really didn't care about these locals. After all, their boat was not easy to deal with. If they dared to be tough, then Jiang Hai wouldn't mind letting them know how tough they were. After sending Kevin and the others off, Jiang Hai took Belle off the boat. They still had to buy other things. There was no need to buy food because there were still some leftovers from the barracuda and other fish that they had caught today after selling them off. According to Kevin and the others, Delina and Marion caught the barracuda, and it had nothing to do with them. So they all stayed on the boat. At least, they didn't have to worry about food, and there was a lot of beef on the boat. Most importantly, the food here wasn't very delicious, at least Jiang Hai didn't like it very much. They got off the boat mainly to buy alcohol. Today, they ate and drank on the boat, and they drank a lot of beer, so they just wanted to go to the bar to buy some. But when they walked into the bar, they found that the atmosphere was a little strange. When Jiang Hai and Belle entered the bar yesterday, these people glanced at Jiang Hai and the others, then they didn't care about Jiang Hai and the others. But today, many people kept staring at Jiang Hai, and their eyes were red, which made people feel very depressed. "Boss, the situation doesn't seem right." Jiang Hai felt the unfriendly eyes of these people, and Belle, who retired from the Delta, naturally felt it too. He leaned close to Jiang Hai and whispered, "You have a weapon with you, right?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled and whispered in a low voice, "Of course." Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Belle replied affirmatively. In such an unknown area, he must have a weapon with him. "I have one too, it will be fine." Seeing that Belle also had a weapon with him, Jiang Hai smiled, then said casually. Then, they walked to the bar counter and gently knocked on the table to call over the bartender from yesterday. 2 glasses of the wine you made yesterday, 5 boxes of beer, and a box of rum. Looking at the bartender, Jiang Hai took out a stack of francs from his pocket, which was one of his gains today. However, when he took out the money, he felt that the breathing of many people in the bar had quickened. Feeling this scene, Jiang Hai smiled. He just likes the feeling of walking on a tightrope. He took out a few bills and threw them on the bartender's table. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the bartender quickly put away the money and started to adjust the drinks. "If we are you, I will leave after this drink, and I will send the wine to your boat." After adjusting the drinks and serving a glass to Jiang Hai and Belle, the bartender whispered to Jiang Hai, "Why?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also raised his eyebrows and asked, "Your business in the fishing company has been spread here, understand?" Hearing Jiang Hai ask why, the bartender couldn't help but frown. Did this guy take too much medicine? It's so obvious, is there a need to ask why? "Thank you, this is your tip, remember to send the wine to my boat." Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was still surprised, but the bartender was also kind. After taking out another francs and handing it to the bartender, Jiang Hai slowly tasted the wine. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't care, the bartender didn't say anything. He had already reminded him, so it's not his fault if he didn't listen. Therefore, the bartender started mixing the drinks again and pretended not to know anything. Chapter 494. "Hey, handsome, can you buy me a drink?" Just as Jiang Hai and the others were drinking there, the crowd over there also moved. A good-looking woman walked out from the crowd. In Jiang Hai's eyes, it was not a problem for her to score 70 points. She looked very much like a very famous social butterfly in the United States, called Kim Kardashian. Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment when he saw her huge upper body and buttocks. However, the makeup on her face was a bit too thick. This woman walked to Jiang Hai's side, deliberately bent her waist, revealing her Mariana seduction, and said to Jiang Hai with a seductive face. However, Jiang Hai did not pay attention to her. He knew that this woman was up to no good, so why bother with her? What? You don't want to give me face? Seeing that Jiang Hai just looked at her and did not speak to her, the woman's eyebrows raised, and the smile on her face turned into a sneer. I know you. Do I need to give you face? Hearing this woman's words, Jiang Hai snorted disdainfully and said jokingly. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at this woman. She wants to give him face? She is thinking too much. Okay. Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, the woman also smiled, and then instantly took off her skirt, and then two huge breasts, which made Jiang Hai a little dizzy, shot in front of Jiang Hai. To be honest, Jiang Hai had seen a lot of women, but this was the first time he saw such a big one. But unfortunately, this woman did not let Jiang Hai look at her for nothing. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, she could not help but smile, took off her clothes, and shouted loudly, "Please, this man is molesting me. Boy, you dare to touch my woman." Sure enough, when her voice fell, a very rough man had already pushed the crowd and walked out. As soon as he saw this man appear, Jiang Hai could not help but laugh at himself. Since Jiang Hai had the Dragon Balls, he had been avoiding melodramatic plots. Most of his decisions were difficult for others to guess the ending, but it turned out that this world was a melodramatic world. Sometimes, although you tried your best to avoid these, natural disasters and man-made disasters could happen at any time. A large pot of dog blood would fall from the sky and drench you, just like now. Seeing this guy, who was only about 1.7 meters tall, pushing the crowd and coming forward, Jiang Hai and Belle also looked at each other. After drinking the wine in their glass, they stood up. Boy, you want to run after taking advantage of me. Seeing Jiang Hai and Belle stand up, the small guy here waved his hand, and in an instant, more than a dozen guests in the bar also stood up, and quickly surrounded Jiang Hai and Belle in the bar. Run? I didn't think about it, but you can say what you want. Glancing at the people around him, Jiang Hai gently moved his neck and shoulders, and then said to the person in front of him with disdain. Most of the people from South America were not very tall. Of course, this was not absolute. For example, there were many insiders in the NBA who were from South America, but most of them were very short. The shortest region in the world, besides South Asia, is South America. Indeed, there are many tall basketball players, but their national sport, football, their height on the field is exposed. Jiang Hai is now 192 centimeters tall barefoot, and Belle is 188 centimeters tall. When he stood up, he looked like a crane in a flock of chickens. You molested my woman, it won't be that easy. How about I cripple your hands, or? Seeing Jiang Hai directly ask, the leader couldn't help but smile. Then he rubbed his thumb, index finger, and middle finger together. Jiang Hai looked at Jiang Hai and said, "Hey, do you want money? How much do you want?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said with a smile, "You're quite smart, I want 20,000, no, I want $50,000. Seeing Jiang Hai take the initiative to mention money, the man's eyes couldn't help but light up, and then he said loudly. He knows that Jiang Hai is not short of money, so he has to peel off a layer of skin from Jiang Hai. He heard that Jiang Hai made nearly $43,000, so it's reasonable for him to pay $7,000. Hearing the leader's words, the dozen or so lackeys around here couldn't help but laugh. They have heard before that Americans are quite afraid of death. Are these two guys about to piss their pants? 50,000? No, 100,000. If you can't come up with $100,000 today, then I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. But unfortunately, they found the wrong prey. When Jiang Hai heard his words, he couldn't help but move his face closer, and then said with an evil smile on his face. What did you say? Say it again. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people who had a smile on their faces instantly put away the smile on their faces, and the leader couldn't help but say with a ruthless face. I said, give me $100,000, or I will throw you into the sea to feed the sharks. Looking at the man in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a serious face, but as soon as his voice fell, the man on this side had already punched him. Looking at the fist coming at him, Jiang Hai didn't dodge, and directly took the punch. Feeling the heavy blow on his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled. 4 times the physical limit of an ordinary person naturally meant that his resistance was 4 times the physical limit of an ordinary person. This punch didn't even leave a mark on Jiang Hai's face, let alone push him back. You can fight back now. Gently wiping his cheek, Jiang Hai smiled, then put away the phone that had been recording next to him. This was the evidence, and now that he fought back, it was called legitimate self-defense. Fight back, I think you are courting death, go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the Puerto Rican gangster shouted and directly pounced on Jiang Hai, but what answered him was Jiang Hai's heavy punch. This punch hit the guy's face hard, and Jiang Hai almost instantly heard the sound of the nose and cheekbones breaking. And this person was also sent flying by Jiang Hai's punch. After flying for 3 or 4 meters in the air, he knocked over 4 tables and chairs in a row before lying down. At this time, he was lying there with his face covered in blood, and his whole person was stunned. Jiang Hai glanced at him and was sure that this guy's nose was definitely broken, and there was no escape from a severe concussion. However, Jiang Hai's punch didn't make the others stop. The remaining dozen or so guys, with the idea that many ants can bite an elephant to death, instantly rushed over. But soon, they realized that no matter how many ants there were, they were still just ants. Moreover, their numbers were not enough to make an elephant afraid. Before Jiang Hai moved, Bell had already moved. First, he directly swept down the person in front with a low whip kick, then he grabbed another person's arm and hit the person's temple with his elbow. This person also fell to the ground in an instant. Although he was not dead, he had lost the ability to fight. At the same time, he kicked back with his hind leg and instantly kicked another person in the stomach, causing him to retreat a few steps and kneel on the ground. He covered his abdomen with both hands and began to vomit, but the sour smell did not affect Jiang Hai and Bell. The two of them were like fierce tigers that had been released from their cages. They rushed towards the people who were still standing there. These people were actually just some gangsters. Usually, it was good enough for them to show off their strength. Now that they had met Jiang Hai and the others, they were really afraid, but it was useless to be afraid. Jiang Hai would still deal with them. Compared to Jiang Hai's strength, Bell's attacks were also very sneaky. He did not have the strength of Jiang Hai, but his skills were much better than Jiang Hai's. After all, he was the one who taught Jiang Hai how to fight. But now, Jiang Hai had a feeling that he had surpassed his master. There was no one under his command that could withstand a single move from him. In a few moves, these guys were directly beaten to the ground. One by one, they held their faces and their stomachs were constantly groaning. Jiang Hai liked to hit people in the face. Those who were beaten to the ground by him would definitely have a nose fracture. In less than 30 seconds, the originally arrogant people were all lying on the ground. Jiang Hai glanced at the blood on his hand and casually wiped it on the clothes of a gangster. Looking at Jiang Hai and Bell's ferocious fighting strength, the people in the bar who originally had some thoughts about fighting instantly withdrew their thoughts. Even a pestle had to be picked, but it was obvious that these two people were not pestles, but durians. If they directly went to deal with them empty-handed, it would definitely not be the durians who died, but themselves. Therefore, the other guests were either watching from the side or had already returned to the table to drink their wine. B*****. Just as Jiang Hai and Bell finished off these people and were about to leave, the boss slowly got up after being confused for so long. He took out a switchblade from his pocket and cursed. With a face full of anger, he charged at Jiang Hai. His face was smashed to the point that even his own mother would not be able to recognize it. His bloodshot eyes did indeed give Jiang Hai a fright, but his reaction was not slow. Before the guy could charge at him, Jiang Hai had already pulled out the big desert eagle that had been strapped to his back and aimed it at the guy. When he saw the black muzzle in front of him, the gangster leader, who had just charged halfway, froze. "If you didn't show up, would have forgotten. $100,000, or I'll throw you into the sea to feed the sharks." Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai's mouth opened slightly. He slowly walked in front of the man and pointed the gun directly at the man's head. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not dare to kill people here, but it did not mean that he would easily let this guy go. Chapter 495. I didn't. Feeling the cold muzzle pointing at his head, the gangster's eyes, which were just blinded by money, became clear again at this time. There was no one who was not afraid of death, but some people died for their beliefs, such as our beloved soldiers, in order to protect the country, in order to protect the homeland. These people's sacrifice was glorious and heavier than Mount Tai. But some people, such as these gangsters, were just brave and ruthless. When they knew that they couldn't beat the other party and were about to die, they were very scared. Now was not the era where they shouted that they would be a hero again after 18 years. In that era, bandits also had to pay attention to a name, such as enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, robbing the rich to help the poor, and so on. Now, this gangster was just jealous of Jiang Hai and wanted to take advantage of him. But they obviously underestimated Jiang Hai's combat power, and they didn't expect Jiang Hai to have a gun. No? Then it's difficult. How about this, according to what you just said, $100,000, or I want both of your hands. Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai was still smiling at first, but in the end, his face became serious. This. Now, this person really didn't dare to resist, he was really scared. Suddenly, he saw the woman beside him who was already trembling in fear. He remembered that Jiang Hai just took a look at the woman's plump upper body. This woman was indeed his lover, but at this time, he couldn't care so much. I'll give her to you, she's yours, you can do whatever you want. Thinking of this, the man directly pulled the woman over and stuffed her into Jiang Hai's arms, looking at Jiang Hai with a face full of desire, hoping that Jiang Hai was a pervert. I really don't like her, but forget it. She can take one of your arms, what about the other one? Looking at the huge woman in his arms, Jiang Hai was disgusted at first. He wouldn't do that with such a woman. After all, she had been with such men before. Who knew if she had some kind of disease in her body? But after thinking about it, it wouldn't be bad if he changed the way he played. Thus, he continued to point the gun at the man. If this woman was one of his arms, what about the other? I understand. Looking at the gun Jiang Hai pointed at his head, the man gritted his teeth. He picked up the dagger in his hand and stabbed it into his left arm. Blood spurted out in an instant, and he fell to the ground in pain. Looking at this person's resolute appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be shocked. It seemed that this guy was really a ruthless person. Scram! But the words were said by Jiang Hai, and he can't kill these people here. After all, Puerto Rico has its own government and laws, and it has a relationship with the United States. If he killed people and extradited them, then Jiang Hai would be in trouble. In order to avoid more trouble, Jiang Hai didn't plan to do anything to the tiger when he made a show of force. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the gangster immediately got up and left quickly with a dozen other people. "Boss, are you taking her back to the ship?" Seeing these people leave, Bale walked over with a smile on his face. He glanced at the girl in Jiang Hai's arms and carefully asked Jiang Hai. Although Bale wasn't a good person, he wasn't a good person. But he knows that he can't touch any woman that Jiang Hai likes. He doesn't want to lose this good job. But looking at this woman, to be honest, in his opinion, except for combat weapons, she doesn't seem to be Jiang Hai's cup of tea. Back to the ship? How is that possible? You continue to drink, and then send the wine back to the ship. Let's go out for a walk. Indeed, this woman is not Jiang Hai's cup of tea, but he won't refuse, occasionally eating fast food outside. After talking to Belle, Jiang Hai signaled with his eyes. Although the woman is still very scared at this time, her trembling body has been suppressed. She slowly moved her body and followed Jiang Hai out of the bar. Opposite the bar, there is a small town hotel. Jiang Hai and her walked in naturally. After booking the best room in the hotel, Jiang Hai took her in. "Do you want to take a bath?" Walking into the room, Jiang Hai asked the woman. Up to you." The woman has already known her ending at this time. Serving a man, she has done such a thing before. Her heart has gradually calmed down. In her opinion, as long as she serves Jiang Hai well, it is estimated that Jiang Hai will not embarrass her. After all, he has just let those guys go, so he shouldn't want her life. "Then let's go together." Seeing that she has gradually calmed down, Jiang Hai also said casually. His voice fell, "The woman over there has taken off the outer long skirt." He has to admit that this woman is really wild. She doesn't wear anything under the long skirt, and the pants below are actually lace panties. Now there is a popular knowledge, maybe everyone knows that the origin of panties is in South America. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the woman quickly took off her clothes, then lowered her head and looked at Jiang Hai shyly. Jiang Hai was not polite. After taking off her clothes, he took her into the hotel bathroom. When the bathtub was filled with water, the two were also taking a shower. When she saw the existence of Jiang Hai, she licked her lips subconsciously. What kind of ability is there in the world? Brazilians are ranked first in the world. They are all South Americans. Other countries may not be so terrible, but they are not bad either. The same is true in Puerto Rico. Before today, this woman only heard that Asian men are not very good in that aspect, but when she saw Jiang Hai, she found that she seemed to have gained something. Under the signal of Jiang Hai's eyes, she slowly squatted down. Her mouth and Jiang Hai's favorite panties also came in handy at this time. When Jiang Hai returned to the ship, it was already past 9:00 in the evening. Seeing that Jiang Hai was back, although Delina and Marion did not say it explicitly, they were both relieved. "Boss, you are so slow." Belle, the only one who knew what Jiang Hai was going to do, watched Jiang Hai get on the ship and couldn't help but laugh. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at him, then quickly walked over. "Well, everyone go to sleep. I think Belle has also told you that we may be targeted, so we can't stop here tonight. If something happens, we can't even run away, so I decided to stop at sea for the night. My only request tonight is that you must all stay in the room, and never come out without my order." Looking at the several people in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously. He was not going to delay for too long. Tonight, he was going to retrieve the sunken ship that he had his eyes on. That was his main goal. "Okay." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone here responded. Although they didn't know what Jiang Hai was going to do, no matter what Jiang Hai wanted to do, they had to obey. With everyone's response, Jiang Hai also walked into the captain's room, started the engine, and drove towards the depths of the sea. As for Belle and others, after packing up, they took their food and drinks and returned to their rooms. Only Azalina watched everyone enter their rooms, then returned to Jiang Hai's captain's room. As soon as she walked in, Jiang Hai noticed her and immediately turned off the navigation on his mobile phone. "Is there anything else?" Looking at Azalina, Jiang Hai turned his head and asked curiously. But as soon as his voice fell, Azalina had already stepped in front of Jiang Hai. She didn't give Jiang Hai any chance to resist at all. Her mouth kissed Jiang Hai's lips, and her tongue officially invaded his lips. Jiang Hai was stunned at first, but fortunately, he quickly reacted and began to fight back. But just as he fought back, Azalina stepped back, then licked her lips gently. "There's no strange taste in your mouth. It seems that you haven't kissed anyone, but that's not right. Judging from Bale's appearance just now, you should have gone looking for food." Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina said with some hesitation. In terms of combat effectiveness, Azalina and Bale are about the same. Although Azalina's skills are better, her physical fitness makes her a little disadvantaged when facing Bale. But when it comes to other things, Azalina is much better than Bale. Psychology, action, interrogation, reconnaissance, wilderness survival, and so on. She is better than Bale in all aspects, let alone Jiang Hai. So when he heard her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. "I came here to tell you that the key to my room is under your pillow. Don't always go outside, it's dangerous and dirty. Since I'm your bodyguard, I have the obligation to protect your safety, including here." Looking at Jiang Hai's slightly embarrassed face, Azalina knew that her judgment was right. Then, she rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai and said, "This guy is really interesting. He has such good quality women at home, but he still wants to go outside to play. He's crazy." After giving Jiang Hai one last squeeze, Azalina wandered back to her room. Looking at her figure, Jiang Hai couldn't help but touch his nose. "Wait until I have time." He also knew that Azalina was right. It's not a good idea to always go looking for food. Moreover, there are many women around him who can help him, but most of them are difficult for Jiang Hai to cross the threshold in his heart. Take Aphrodite and the others for example. After all, they used to. So they can't do it. And Delina and Marion are his daughters. They should be able to do it with Clive, but now the problem is that there are some uncertainties with Clive. Therefore, Jiang Hai was also a bit depressed. When he was depressed, time passed by quickly. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed by. At this time, the ship's bell rang. He knew that he had arrived at his destination. Chapter 496. Plop. With a splash, Jiang Hai entered the water again. As the bubbles around him gradually disappeared, Jiang Hai also turned on the headlamp in front of him, then he swam quickly towards the deep sea. Jiang Hai was familiar with doing this. After all, he had gone to the sea twice last time. He was very familiar with the activities in the sea. He didn't plan to get the treasures in the water in one day. He went down today to check it out. If there was not much in this ship, then there was no need for him to take it. He was wearing the thickest protective swimsuit with an iron wire net on the outside. He carried 2 fishing guns on his back and an underwater pistol, which he had specially brought along. Other than that, there was also a metal bag used to store samples. After upgrading to a dragon, Jiang Hai really found that he had changed a lot. In addition to the physical fitness that he said at the beginning had become 4 times the human limit, his spiritual sensitivity had also increased greatly, and the release of spiritual energy were his new abilities. However, what Jiang Hai was most concerned about was his ability to move underwater. In his manner, he had already tried it. After going into the water, he still didn't need to breathe and ignored the water pressure. The most important thing was that his body, which was originally slow underwater, was now like an underwater dragon at this time. Although it was still not as good as the swimming masters like sailfish and tuna, it shouldn't be slower than the average boat. For example, tuna, the fastest speed of this fish can reach 160 kilometers per hour. Of course, the speed won't be maintained for long. After all, fish are cold-blooded animals. If the blood is too hot, it will burst the blood vessels. But even so, the cruising speed of this fish is about 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. According to the calculation, 1 nautical mile is about 1.8 kilometers, which means that it can swim about 33 nautical miles per hour. This speed is no slower than Jiang Hai's yacht at full speed. It beats almost 90% of the ships. Even warships are rarely so fast. If it was during World War II, this speed would almost beat the Earth in seconds. Jiang Hai's current speed is far from so fast, and his cruising speed can't be compared. He can swim about 10 nautical miles per hour at full speed, but this is already very fast. 1 nautical mile is 1,800 meters. Jiang Hai can swim 18,000 meters per hour while ignoring the water pressure. Even the Mariana Trench is not so deep. This is not slow for Jiang Hai. He dived into the water. With his current perception, physical fitness, swimming speed, and most importantly, his weapon, unless he encounters some unknown creatures, ordinary sharks are really not his opponents. Even if there is something he can't handle, don't forget, he can release spiritual energy, and he can forcibly take the other party as his underling. Therefore, Jiang Hai's speed after entering the water is extremely fast. In less than half an hour, he has already arrived at the location of his target. Under the illumination of his headlamp, a shabby Spanish galleon like a ghost ship appeared in front of him. In the history of Europe, from 1500 years ago, it can be regarded as the era of the village chief's hegemony. Because the whole of Europe is not very big, there are only a few people in total. Today, you fight me, and tomorrow, I fight you. The relationship is also somewhat intricate. It is somewhat like the period before the Qin dynasty in the earliest Wuxia. During the period of hegemony, there are many marriages between each other. Today, you fight one family, tomorrow, you fight another family. It is very chaotic. However, after 1500 years, Columbus turned everyone's attention to the distant American continent. From then on, the original hegemony of the village chief has become the strongest existence in the world who has the most colonies in the world. The strongest of the first generation is the Spanish. It is not because the Spanish are very powerful, but because they have mastered a kind of sailing technology. This kind of sailing ship is called the Spanish galleon. This ship is the second strongest ship in the world at that time. The only ship that is stronger than this ship is Wuxia's Zhenghe treasure ship. However, the Wuxia people are not interested in the expedition to Europe. During the Ming dynasty, except for Zhu Di who has some interest in overseas, the following emperors are not interested in Europe and the world. Instead, they are more interested in immortal cultivation, alchemy, and carpentry. Of course, this may be because they have no choice. Because in the Ming dynasty, although the emperor is the unified monarch, he himself does not have much power. Some are like the current constitutional monarchy of the United Kingdom, where all the power is controlled by the cabinet. For example, the famous Zhang Zhuzheng and others are actually like Prime Minister Cameron of that era. In fact, they have the final say in the Ming dynasty. They can ignore or reject the emperor's words. It is precisely because of this that there are more eccentric emperors in the Ming dynasty, and the main theme of that era is Chengzhu Confucianism. These officials didn't have any sense of crisis. What they paid attention to was the eight-legged ethics and the like. Therefore, they have no idea about expanding overseas. This also caused Wuxia to miss the second opportunity to rise. Of course, this is all in hindsight. Who knows what will happen if Wuxia really launches an attack? But it is undeniable that the reason why the Spanish dominated Europe for 200 years is because of their ship, the Spanish galleon. It can be said that before the appearance of the steam engine, this ship is a giant on the sea. It has a strong load capacity, strong wind, strong defense, and fast running. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is today's aircraft carrier. At that time, almost all the pirates were proud of a Spanish galleon. At this time, in front of Jianghai, is a Spanish galleon. The owner of this ship is not the Spanish government at that time, but a pirate. Bartholomew Roberts. Speaking of this name now, 11 out of 10 people may not know who this person is. However, 300 years ago in the Caribbean region, no, it could be said that in the entire Europe, there was no one who did not know him. Because he is also a legend. Roberts was born in 1682 and died in 1722. He only lived for 40 years. But in these 40 years, he became famous. He first worked as a sailor on an armed slave ship. The business he did was not good. His main job was to transport slaves from Africa to mine gold or grow cocoa. But later, he was robbed by pirates. After being robbed, the pirates wanted to kill him. This made him very scared, so he told the pirates not to kill him. He wanted to join the pirates, and the pirates also need to replenish their manpower, so he agreed. This guy was also very smart and slowly made a name for himself among the pirates. Until he joined a pirate named Davis. When he was in Africa, he was killed by the natives. He killed his way out, and finally became the captain. His first battle as the captain was when they quietly came to the coast of Brazil and attacked a Portuguese fleet with 42 ships. The victim would never have thought that he would be robbed in such a large fleet. When he came back to his senses, he had already escaped with 40,000 Brazilian gold coins. This was also a reassurance to his men. Later, his pirate team grew bigger and bigger. At its peak, there were more than 400 ships, but it was because he was too strong. Furthermore, he did not have the backing of the government. This caused public anger in the Caribbean Sea. In the end, in the morning of 1722, he was attacked by his own country, England. He was hit by shrapnel and died on the spot, ending his sinful life. The reason why he was remembered was mainly related to his style. This guy was particularly shameless and sour. He usually liked to wear a black suit and wear jewelry all over his body. He never drank and liked to drink tea. The most important thing was that he believed in Christianity. Not only did he believe in it, but he also let his men believe in it. He even organized a church band. Although he always wanted to let the people of the church become pirates, the people of the church would not do it. He did not succeed until he died. And according to the current saying, he was full of flavor, especially good at pretending, and especially sour. It was precisely because of his style that people gave him the nickname, Black Baronet. The ship that Jiang Hai was targeting today was his ship, but it wasn't his flagship. It might be a big ship or something like that. It was just a ship that was accidentally sunk when he came to South America to fish for money. According to the map that Jiang Hai bought, there were a lot of treasures hidden on this ship, but it was not clear if there were any left. Looking at the giant ship in front of him, according to the description at that time, it was indeed a giant ship. Jiang Hai slowly leaned over and gently grabbed the edge of the ship, then slowly turned over and jumped on. He had to admit that this ship was well protected here. Unlike the last ship that Jiang Hai saw, which was badly rotten, this ship basically maintained its original appearance. It was not stuck in the trench, but fell directly to the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea here was only so deep. After Jiang Hai turned over and got on the ship, he deliberately stomped his feet. The deck of the ship was indeed shaking, but it did not break. It seemed that the wood of this ship was really rare. It was more than 300 years, and it had not rotted to the roots. It was really not easy. After confirming that there was no problem with the ship, Jiang Hai also took out his weapon. Holding the spear gun with both hands, he slowly walked down to the bottom of the ship. Although there were many buildings on the top floor, it was obvious that there was no treasure that Jiang Hai wanted. There was a tattered wooden sail that had long rotted away, and a small house that had long been broken into pieces. There was nothing to see. Slowly walking to the stairs, Jiang Hai first threw a light stick down. In an instant, a lot of fish were scared away by the light thrown down by Jiang Hai. However, these fish were just some small fish that Jiang Hai had seen last time. Chapter 497. In fact, there were many creatures in the deep sea, especially fishes and eels. If you look at them carefully, you will feel that these guys are terrifying, but if you zoom in to look at them, they are just ordinary. Because they are located in the deep sea, these fishes have particularly good eyesight, and sunlight can't shine in here. Therefore, these fishes' eyes are unusually big to capture light sources. Their mouths are also unusually big, so they look like monsters, but who would catch them and look at them carefully? At least, Jiang Hai didn't have such an idea. He went to the second floor of the cabin. Just like the cabin that Jiang Hai encountered last time, the second floor is the first floor under the plate armor. This is where the sailors live. Although this ship is not as old as the previous one, it is almost 100 years less, and it is relatively well preserved. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After making sure that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit, only a few gold coins. Jiang Hai had no choice but to throw a light stick into each room. Jiang Hai threw a light stick into each room. After confirming that there was nothing left, he would enter. After a brief search, he would leave. This floor really didn't have much profit. After reaching the end of the second floor, Jiang Hai went down to the third floor. The third floor is where the treasures are. Generally speaking, if a Spanish galleon is a merchant ship, it has the lowest configuration, 2 layers of plate armor. But generally, after becoming a pirate ship, it will have 3 or even more layers. Jiang Hai doesn't know how many layers it has at most. But at least the ship in front of him has 3 layers of plate armor. The third floor is where the treasures are placed. It is also the place with the best protection. After Jiang Hai walked to the end of the second floor, he found that the third deck is actually closed. It seems that when the ship sank, the exit was not opened. Jiang Hai used his own strength to open the exit, but as soon as he opened it, some wood chips and some dust-like things rushed up in an instant. Dodging the dust that has accumulated for many years, Jiang Hai waited for the water to clear again before walking to the entrance of the third floor. Jiang Hai threw down a glowing stick, but as soon as he threw it down, a layer of fine goosebumps instantly appeared on his scalp. Because at this time, there were countless human skeletons at the entrance of the third floor, after being soaked in seawater for so many years. Most importantly, although the third deck was isolated from the fishes and the like, the insects on the third deck certainly wouldn't let go of these bodies. At this time, all of these people had their mouths wide open. Their empty eyes were staring at the exit of the third deck. Jiang Hai couldn't help but imagine what would happen next. It was very likely that the fourth floor of the ship, which was the water storage, was hit by the cannonball, and then the ship sank. And these pirates were very likely originally guarding here, or wanted to take advantage of the sinking ship to make a fortune and then escape. However, they didn't know who blocked the exit to the third floor. Before they could escape, they were locked up here. The water directly flooded in and drowned them all. From their open mouths, it could be seen that they were drowned. Looking at the dozens of complete skeletons below, Jiang Hai took a deep breath. Although looking at the scene in front of him, he was a little panicked. How can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? So Jiang Hai slowly walked down from the second deck. After gently kicking away the skeletons piled up on the stairs with his feet, Jiang Hai walked into the third deck. The layout of the third deck was somewhat similar to the pirate ship Jiang Hai entered last time. Unlike the second floor, there were many cabins and the like. At this time, there were only 2 huge rooms. According to the rules of the last time, Jiang Hai first opened one. As a result, after the fluorescent stick went in, he found that there was nothing special here. There were only a small mountain of gold coins and some jewels pushed there. In the other room, Jiang Hai was looking forward to it a little. He also hoped that he could get a pile of treasures like the last time, but unfortunately, there was nothing here. It was also a small mountain of gold coins and jewels. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai sighed a little. This time, there was nothing like the king's armor, which proved that the income was reduced. But then he shook his head. Although there was no big profit, if he could sell these things, it should be worth a lot of money. At least it could be worth about 500 million. This time, Jiang Hai didn't prepare to leave with just one ship. One ship was 500 million, 2 ships would be 1 billion. The only thing he needs to pay attention to now is whether his yacht can hold so many treasures. There is also the problem of sales. Of course, he still asked Moses Adams to contact the auction house. Jiang Hai won't cooperate with others to do this business. It's not like he can't do it himself. There is no need to look for partners and share their money. After recollecting his mind, Jiang Hai took his bag. After filling it with treasures, he returned to the ship. The things he packed were not without a goal. He will still be here for a few days. It's impossible to get the treasures here on the ship today. In case he encounters some intentional robbers or the American Coast Patrol, it will be easy to get into trouble. If it's only a small amount, then he can say that he bought it. After all, he is a local tyrant. But if it's a large amount, then there is no way to explain it. So he has to prepare all these things. He will come back to get these things on the ship and then bring them back to the United States. The things he packed now are more representative of these things, such as some gold coins, some jewelry, and so on. After he takes these things, he will appraise them to see how much they are worth and estimate the value of the pirate ship. After taking the things, Jiang Hai returned to the plate armor. Then, with a kick of his legs, he instantly rushed to the sea level. After his figure left, behind the ship, a huge figure slowly floated over, then looking at the deck passage that has been opened, this huge figure actually went directly into the deck entrance that looked much smaller than it. It seems that the next time Jiang Hai comes, there will be a guest waiting for him. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't feel that at this time, because he was already swimming quickly to the sea level. After swimming for about 30 minutes, Jiang Hai's head came out of the water again. Looking at the still calm yacht in front of him, Jiang Hai quietly climbed onto the ship and then went into his room. After changing everything, he also threw the bag he took out on the floor. Then he called Delina and Marion, and the 3 of them studied it together. This time, the gold coins Jiang Hai brought up were still Spanish gold coins. After all, Spain was the king of the world at that time. So, the gold coins they produced were very versatile and valuable, just like dollar was now. It was far from being comparable to the gold coins of England and France. Of course, it was different after the 18th century. There were no gold-producing countries in South America. There were only silver-producing countries here, such as Chile and Peru, which were rich in silver. Compared to South America, the United States was a gold-producing country. There was also the famous South Africa. Of course, there was also Wuxia. Wuxia's gold production was currently the highest in the world, but the country had already started to mine it in a limited way. After all, if they kept mining like this, they would run out sooner or later. After cleaning up these things, Jiang Hai took out his camera and took some photos of these things from different directions. Then he sent these photos to Moses Adams via satellite. Although it was midnight, Moses Adams was still a very good professional lawyer. Moreover, he also knew that working for Jiang Hai naturally had its benefits. After receiving these photos, he immediately used his connections. He went to find some experts to appraise Jiang Hai's things. Later, the experts confirmed that the gold and silver coins Jiang Hai took were indeed Spanish gold coins, and the gems were about the same quality as the gems from last time. According to the experts' estimates, Jiang Hai's gems were worth about $1 million. When he received the news, it was almost dawn outside, but Jiang Hai was still very energetic. He calculated in his heart. The things he took were about 1% of the value of a room. These things were worth more than $1 million, so the things in one room were worth about $100 million. 2 rooms meant $200 million. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai smacked his lips in disappointment. But in any case, having money was better than nothing. He had originally thought that the things on this ship would be worth at least $500 million, but now it seemed that he had taken it for granted. Of course, this was only the estimate of the experts. According to Moses Adams, if these things were sold to an auction house, the price would increase by 20 or 30%. It would definitely increase by 20% to 30%. But even so, 200 million was only between 240 million and 260 million. Jiang Hai's heart was now big. Although money was just a bunch of numbers, he still hoped to get more numbers. After hiding the gems, Jiang Hai restarted the engine and headed for the town from last night. At the same time, he also took a nap in the captain's cabin. By the time he returned to the town, it was already past 7 in the morning. Kevin and the other 2 girls had been waiting here for a long time. At first, they thought that Jiang Hai and the others had run away. But they were unwilling to go back just like that, so they waited here for a while. It was precisely because of this wait that they saw Jiang Hai and the others. As soon as they saw Jiang Hai's yacht approaching, they excitedly waved their hands. "Girls, where are we going today?" As the yacht approached the port, Jiang Hai went to wash his face and walked up to the plate armor. Looking at the 4 girls in front of him, Jiang Hai asked them with a smile. Chapter 498. Let's go catch lobsters today. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl here said with a smile. Obviously, they didn't go into the water yesterday, which made them feel a little regretful, but if they go fishing for tuna, they will be attacked, but if they go to catch lobsters today, it doesn't matter. Catch lobsters? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then his brow frowned slightly. What's so fun about this? He caught this thing almost every day in the manor, and he has lost interest in it. Yeah, the lobsters in the Caribbean are still very good. You can catch them and try them, but the price is very low, unless you can get the king shrimp. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin and the others here were very excited. Well, let's get on the boat. Looking at their excited look, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He suddenly remembered that he didn't really come here to play, he came here to make money. Since they said that they want to catch lobsters, then let's go. Not yet, we have to buy some scuba tanks first, like this, otherwise, you won't be able to get off the boat. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kevin shook her head, then took out a pair of diving goggles from the bag and put on a small respirator. Of course, they can't really go down with an oxygen tank. Their so-called scuba tank can be said to be a small oxygen tank. It's not right to call it an oxygen tank because it contains air, and it can be breathed a dozen times in the mouth. In this way, people can stay underwater for about 10 minutes. If it's someone with a large lung capacity, it's not a problem to stay underwater for 15 or 6 minutes. Of course, if it's pure oxygen, it's also possible to stay underwater for 20 minutes. However, although Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, it's not as easy to buy oxygen here as in the United States. In fact, even in China, oxygen tanks are not expensive, but if you want to get oxygen, it's not easy to get it unless you're sick or know someone. Jiang Hai's boat naturally has no oxygen, but he is also quite interested in this scuba tank. Although he doesn't need it, he still has to pretend in front of others. Hearing Kevin's words, Jiang Hai asked the people behind him who had woken up who wanted to go into the water. Finally, it was determined that only Belle and Harriman, who were not interested in water, would stay on the boat. The rest of the people would go into the water, so Jiang Hai went to buy 4 scuba tanks and returned to the boat with the 4 girls. It was still Kevin who led the way. Jiang Hai and the others also rushed all the way to the place where they caught the lobsters. On the way, Jiang Hai also listened to Kevin's introduction of the lobsters here. He also had some understanding of the lobsters here. In China, besides the domestic lobsters, there were also different grades of lobsters. The lobsters with the best quality were the Australian lobsters. Australian lobsters were the best in terms of quality, weight, and taste. Therefore, in China, Australian lobsters were the most expensive. Of course, Australian lobsters were also divided into different types such as green dragon, flower dragon, and so on. The prices were also different, so there was no need to break them down here. In addition to Australian lobsters, there was also a lot of Boston lobsters in China. The small ones were naturally not very expensive, around 100 renminbi per kilogram, but the big ones were not cheap. It was only a little cheaper than Australian lobsters. Otherwise, if Jiang Hai's lobsters were sold for $3,000 per lobster, the tourists would have already gone crazy. After that, there was the Caribbean lobster. The scientific name of the Caribbean lobster should be Caribbean spiny dragon, which was a type of spiny lobster. It was very common in the sea, because Australian lobsters were also in this family. However, although the Caribbean lobster was a distant relative of the Australian lobster, it was much cheaper than Australian lobsters. But this thing was much cheaper than an Australian dragon. In a restaurant, a 2-kilogram Caribbean spiked dragon could be sold for €10 or $12. Here, the price was calculated by the dollar, not the kilogram. Lobsters that were 3 to 4 kilograms were all priced at this price. The fishermen here were too lazy to catch lobsters that were less than 3 kilograms. Because the Caribbean region, such as Cuba and Panama, was in a very primitive state. They did not have much of an industrial society, so there were very few people who ate lobsters here. Basically, no one specially went to catch lobsters. Only tourists would eat them, but there were not many tourists here. This place was not as peaceful as imagined, so those who dared to come here were either brave or new people. After all, these people were very few, so the sea here was not destroyed on a large scale. The number of lobsters was less in coastal areas, but there were still a lot in some uninhabited areas. After listening to Kevin's introduction, Jiang Hai touched his chin. To be honest, he had never eaten lobsters before. When he ate lobsters, his first meal was Boston lobsters, which were the lobsters with big pincers. The Caribbean spiny dragon was the kind of lobster without big pincers. He had never eaten this kind of lobster before, so he wanted to try it this time. While driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at other maps. He wanted to see if there were any shipwrecks near the sea area mentioned by Kevin. As a result, he really saw one, but it was a little far away. Because catching lobsters was destined to not be able to go too deep into the sea, even people couldn't bear it. And with the depth that people can dive, with the current technology, it was very easy to pull up a sunken ship. Jiang Hai's goal this time was about 40 nautical miles east of the place where he caught lobsters. It was not far, so he could come and take a look at it at night. Driving the boat, Jiang Hai looked at the sea while paying attention to his coordinates. After arriving at the sea area specified by Kevin, Jiang Hai also stopped the boat. As the boat stopped, everyone ran out of the cabin. When they came out, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. Not only did the four girls change into bikinis at this time, because the water was not very deep, so it wasn't very cold, so they didn't need to wear thick clothes such as diving suits. An ordinary bikini was enough, and Jiang Hai had already seen the bikini swimsuit show of the four of them yesterday. Now he was looking at Delina and Marion. They were naturally not the main focus, but Azalina. Azalina was indeed a legendary Eastern European and Soviet girl. When Jiang Hai first saw her, his first impression was that she was thin, but later on, his impression was that she was strong, but now she looked really attractive. Her white and tender skin, long blonde hair, high nose, and deep blue eyes formed an 80% face. In addition, she had stayed with Jiang Hai for so long, and she also ate Jiang Hai's beef and fish every day. Her body had already recovered to its peak state, and the streamlined muscles on her slender legs looked very beautiful. That perfect V-line and 8-pack abs, a slender waist that was narrower than an A4, and two long, straight legs. What's more, the dark blue bikini on her body was really tempting. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze lingering on her, Azalina couldn't help but smile. This was also a good thing. Jiang Hai looked at the three girls in front of him and said seriously, "Well, let's get ready to go into the water. But after going into the water, you must listen to me. You must not be too far away from me, and don't touch anything." Jiang Hai looked at the three girls in front of him and said seriously, "Of course." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delina and Marion immediately responded. They had dived in Jiang Hai's manner before, so they naturally knew that it was actually very dangerous underwater. There were many poisonous animals, so they had to be careful. What's more, they were in a very strange sea area, so they had to be more careful. "Then let's go." Seeing that everyone was ready, Jiang Hai repeatedly told them what to pay attention to, then nodded and jumped into the sea first. After looking around the sea and confirming that there were no other harmful organisms in the water such as sharks, Jiang Hai also made an okay gesture towards above. Closely after that, they all jumped into the sea. After entering the water, people who have dived before know that it takes a certain amount of time to adapt. Although Jiang Hai and the others didn't dive very deep, the water pressure was still very uncomfortable, so they needed a little bit of time to adapt. Therefore, they circled about 2 meters below the water surface for a few times. After about 5 minutes, they resurfaced and filled with air again. After that, they officially dived to the bottom of the sea. When they reached the bottom of the sea, Jiang Hai smiled. As the bubbles in front of him disappeared, a perfect coral reef appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had always been a little depressed, because he also had coral reefs, but most of them were gray. It was the most common coral. It looked quite spectacular, but it was not beautiful. It was not like what he saw now. It was really beautiful. The corals in the tropical sea could be said to be one of the most beautiful scenes in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people diving in Australia's Great Barrier Reef every year. Although the Caribbean Sea wasn't as famous as the Great Barrier Reef, it also had its own flavor. Jiang Hai glanced over and saw a large piece of coral, but compared with his own gray coral, this one was much more beautiful. Purple, yellow, pink, colorful, all kinds of corals appeared in front of Jiang Hai. There were even a lot of red corals, which were quite valuable in China. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sigh. It was indeed a tropical sea area. It was much better than his own cold sea area. On these corals, there were many sea anemones and the like. Many of them were like clownfish, butterfly fish, and the like. They shuttled back and forth among these sea anemones, and some other creatures were also wandering around. It was a perfect ecological environment. Chapter 499. Standing there, Jiang Hai kept looking at the underwater scenery in front of him. Although the underwater scenery in Jiang Hai's manner was not bad, it was still inferior. But compared to this place, it was indeed much worse. At least this place could be sold as a tourist attraction. As for his place, hee. Not to mention selling it as a scenic spot and opening it to others for free, if he didn't allow people to catch fish, no one would go there. However, no matter what, Jiang Hai still had to think of some ways to make his underwater fishery more beautiful. It seemed that he would have to waste a lot of spiritual energy again. At this time, he found that Kevin and the others who had dived into the water had returned. He glanced at his watch. It turned out that he had been in a daze for about 10 minutes, and Delina and the others had also returned. Seeing that each of them was carrying 2 big lobsters in their hands, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Looking down, sure enough, there were many big lobsters crawling in the crevices of the coral reef. Seeing this, Jiang Hai shrank his body and instantly swam straight into the crevices under the sea. Seeing Jiang Hai's speed, although Jiang Hai didn't swim at his fastest speed, Kevin and the others were still shocked. Jiang Hai's swimming speed was too fast. Even some old fishermen couldn't swim faster than Jiang Haiyu. If Jiang Haiyu were to participate in the Olympic Games, he would definitely win a medal. In fact, they didn't know Jiang Hai well. If Jiang Hai wanted to, he could win anything, let alone a medal. Almost turning his body, Jiang Hai dived into the coral reef in a short time. After catching 2 of the biggest lobsters he saw, he quickly rose up about 3 meters. After wandering for a while, he got on the boat. Of course, he didn't need to wander there. He did this just to make Kevin and the others feel more at ease. When he got on the boat, Belle and Harriman had already prepared the boxes, and the lobsters were also caught by them. Looking at these lively lobsters, Harriman couldn't help but laugh. He knew that these lobsters were quite delicious. Jiang Hai and the others didn't continue to get on the boat. Instead, they stepped on the water for a while and took a break. After filling the boxes with air, they dived into the water again. They couldn't just catch lobsters once. Although Kevin and the others didn't expect to make money by catching these guys, because they were really too cheap here. But since they came here, they naturally had to bring some home. Jiang Hai naturally prepared a batch of frozen lobsters. In this way, Jiang Hai's lobster catching competition began. While Jiang Hai and the others were playing here, on the other side of the earth, in a not-so-high-end wine restaurant in the imperial capital, a person hurriedly pushed open the door of a private room and walked in. "Hey, everyone, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'll punish myself by drinking 3 cups later." After walking into the private room, the man said with a smile, sat on the only empty seat, poured himself a cup, and drank it in one gulp. "Brother Zhou, you're really slow, the seafood boat you've been waiting for is already a little cold." Seeing the arrival of this person, several people on the opposite side couldn't help laughing and talking. At the same time, there were some complaints in their words. Hearing this, the person named Brother Zhou couldn't help but look at the seafood boat in front of him. A trace of playfulness flashed across his face, then he gently picked up his chopsticks and knocked on the plate in front of him with the most shell-like food. Seafood boat was actually just a name. It used a large pot, a large plate, or a ship-shaped wood, and it was filled with cooked seafood. A seafood boat could be eaten by 3 or 4 people, and the price wasn't expensive. In the capital, it was between 300 yuan and 500 yuan. It was a very popular way of eating recently. Of course, the price was different for different things. Now all the people here are Xiao Bai, and their monthly salary is an average of 7,000 or 8,000 yuan. After deducting the rent, water, electricity, internet, and travel expenses to and from work, even if they have a car, they have to refuel it. They don't have much money left in a month. Although they are not particularly stingy, seafood boats are definitely delicious for them. But looking at these dishes, Brother Zhou was very pretentious and didn't move his chopsticks. "Hey, I don't have anything to eat for the time being, you guys eat quickly." Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, Brother Zhou said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, several people next to him couldn't help but look at him. "What's the situation? Didn't you like to eat it before?" Looking at him, a person who has a good relationship with him asked strangely. "Yeah, but didn't I go to the United States a while ago? These things were almost free there. It was so cheap, so I'm tired of eating it." Hearing his words, Brother Zhou said with a calm face. "Brag, Zhou de Peo, don't talk nonsense." But as soon as his voice fell, a bad friend came to tear down his stage. "Hey! You don't believe me, let me show you the photos." In fact, Brother Zhou had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. He took out his mobile phone arrogantly, then clicked on the photos and showed them to the people next to him. Sure enough, the people in these photos were all Brother Zhou, and in the photos he clicked on, they were naturally all seafood. The big prawns were Arctic prawns, each of them was the size of a palm, and the scallops were full of meat. They were more than a size bigger than the scallops in front of them. The oysters were really free, they were just pushed over there. The most eye-catching thing was the big lobster, and there was more than one. These people were a little stunned. Then look at the small seafood boat. It has to be admitted that sometimes, the boat of friendship capsizes, and the boat of seafood capsizes. Let me tell you, the place I went to is called Winthrop. Have you seen these big prawns? $2 per catty, that's $4 per kilogram. They're all live, so $4 is only about 20 yuan. You can buy 2 catties of them, and they're all wild. The prawn meat is called bouncy, and the prawn brains are called plentiful. If you don't want to, you can go to a restaurant and buy them. There's an Italian restaurant over there. The scallops are just there. You can eat as much as you want for $3. Oysters are even more free. This crab, this cod, this squid, this salmon. They're as cheap as you can get. Look at this sea cucumber, this abalone, heh. Hearing this person's words, many of the foodies present couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Indeed, if this guy wasn't bullshitting, then these seafood were more than half cheaper than in China, at least 2/3 cheaper, or even more. Finally, they saw the big lobsters. Brother Zhou, these big guys are much cheaper than in China, right? Pointing at the largest lobster among them, one of them asked Brother Zhou carefully, but his eyes were full of envy. "This one, it's not bad. This one is the king of lobsters, and this one is only 32 catties. It's not a lot there. Look at this person." Brother Zhou glanced at the lobster on his phone, then pretended to be calm, but in fact, he was overjoyed. This guy's acting was really comfortable. He happened to see Jiang Hai in the photo, so he pointed at him. "This guy is the richest man in Winthrop. He's a Wuxia, and this is my brother. This lobster, 2-headed abalone, and sea cucumber are all produced by him. He has a big manor there, and he raises cows. Such a big lobster, let alone other things, in China, you can't eat it without at least 100,000. But over there, just mention my name and it's $3,000, which is less than $18,000 to $20,000. I'll send it directly to the hotel to cook." Of course, the main purpose was to praise Jiang Hai. Then, Brother Zhou talked about the lobster. When they heard that such a big lobster only cost $20,000, many people were tempted. Of course, for white-collar workers like them, of course, they weren't willing to eat a $20,000 lobster by themselves. But if a few people pooled their money together, it was still not bad. Brother Zhou just said that the lobster was 32 catties. Even if it was only 20 catties without the shell, it wouldn't be a problem for 10 people to eat it. In total, each person would only spend a little more than $1,000. It was too tempting to eat such a big lobster with only a little more than $1,000. At that time, many people were tempted, but there were still a few people who weren't tempted. After all, not everyone was a foodie. There were always some people who didn't like to eat. But when these people saw that in addition to the ingredients, there were many other photos. There were photos of playing at the beach, catching fish in the sea, riding a horse, shooting a gun, and party photos. For a moment, everyone's eyes were attracted by the phone. One topic after another was thrown to Brother Zhou, and Brother Zhou also told them one by one. For example, the clothes he was wearing now were more than 1,000 yuan in China, but they were more than 100 yuan there. When they went to the beach to play, it was all free. When they went to the sea to catch fish, the food they ate on the boat was all free. When they went to ride horses, it was almost as cheap as playing for free. Most importantly, how many men did not like guns? Although there was no shooting range to play with guns there, you could shoot freely in the shooting range. Only bullets cost money. Playing with guns was free. You could play with any gun you wanted, from rifles, pistols, shotguns, to assault rifles, machine guns, and sniper rifles. As long as you could move, you could play with it. At the end of the day, it would cost about $100. It was fun. Looking at these photos, Brother Zhou instantly became the focus of these people. Originally, they were looking forward to and wanted to eat the seafood boat, but at this time, they were left out, especially after these people asked about the price. Including accommodation, round-trip tickets, and travel expenses, it was only 8,000 per person. It was really cheap. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.